Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was the son of dragon god Igneel and celestial spirit king Naruto x Lucy x Wendy. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Blazing Star and the Gentle Sky. The first sensation was not of light, but of geometry. Before he possessed eyes, the being that would be called Naruto perceived the universe as a symphony of perfect angles and crystalline refractions. He existed within the celestial spirit world, a realm not of clouds and harps, but of silent, inexorable order. Constellations weren't distant fires but tangible, interlocking gears in a cosmic clockwork. Their light casting long, sharp-edged shadows across planes of solidified starlight. The air, a concept he was only just beginning to process, hummed with a mathematical precision. A resonant frequency that was both his cradle and his creator. He was a confluence, a deliberate paradox woven by the king of this realm. His form was a nebulous swirl of nascent stellar fire, particles of gold and crimson dancing in a form that was not yet solid. One moment he was a miniature supernova, the next a contained solar flare, his essence held together by the sheer, unbending will of the celestial spirit king. The king, a being of immense, quiet power, was less a father and more a celestial artisan. He stood not over a crib, but before a cosmic loom, his vast, mustachioed face impassive. His gloved hands conducting the flow of primordial energies with the focus of a grandmaster in the final moves of a universe-spanning game. The king did not speak in words. He communicated in gravitational waves, impulses of light that conveyed complex equations of existence. You were a balance, a wave of pressure communicated, shaping the swirling energies of the child. A singularity of two truths. The unyielding fire of the dragon, the immutable law of the star. One without the other is chaos or stagnation. Together, they are potential. Naruto, in turn, responded not with cries, but with flares of brilliant energy. A burst of gold was curiosity. A pulse of deep crimson was a flicker of nascent pride. He learned, he absorbed, he became. He was taught the language of celestial alignments, the syntax of orbits, the deep, underlying grammar of reality itself. He was 5 years of subjective time in this state of becoming when the king altered the equation. With a gesture that bent space, the king tore open a rift in the crystalline fabric of his realm. It was not a violent act, but one of absolute precision, a perfect circle of shimmering chaos that appeared in the ordered stillness. Through it, a different reality bled through. The scent of ozone and ancient starlight was instantly overwhelmed by the primal, suffocating stench of sulfur, brimstone, and something ancient and reptilian. The serene, mathematical hum of the celestial world was drowned out by a deafening, sub-audible thrumming, the heartbeat of a world, or perhaps, of a single, world-sized being. Your other tutor awaits, the king pulsed, his meaning as clear as a newly formed star. He will teach you not of order, but of strength. Not of law, but of will. Remember the balance. The king guided Naruto's swirling form toward the rift. As he passed through, the change was absolute. He left a realm of cool, precise light and entered a furnace. This new world was a maelstrom of raw, untamed power. Jagged mountains of black obsidian clawed at a sky choked with ash and embers. Rivers of molten rock carved glowing, angry paths through a landscape of cracked earth. And at its heart, coiled around the peak of the largest volcano, was the source of the heartbeat that shook the very foundations of this dimension. Igneel, the fire dragon king, was not merely a large lizard. He was a living mountain. A geological event given flesh and consciousness. His scales were the color of cooling magma, a deep, angry red laced with fissures of internal fire. Each one was the size of a war shield. When he inhaled, the very air seemed to thin, drawn into his colossal lungs. When he exhaled, it was not smoke, but a shimmering wave of pure heat that distorted the light and set distant rocks aglow. His eyes, vast pools of molten gold, opened slowly and fixed upon the shimmering, stellar form of Naruto. His voice was not a sound one heard with their ears, but a tectonic event one felt in their bones. So, the Star King sends his little spark, the voice rumbled, causing a cascade of pebbles to skitter down the mountainside. He is bright, an amusing contradiction. You believe this fragile thing can contain my flame. The celestial spirit king's presence shimmered at the edge of the portal, a cool point of order in the raging chaos. His communication was now a focused beam of thought, directed at the dragon. He is not a container. He is a crucible. He will forge a new flame from both our powers. That was the pact, Igneel. You will teach him to burn. I have taught him to shine. Igneel let out a low chuckle, a sound like a controlled rockslide. He unfurled a single, titanic wing, the membrane of which could have covered a village, and gestured toward the boy. Come then, little spark. Let us see if you are worthy of the inferno. Naruto, now coalescing into a more defined, childlike shape of glowing energy, felt no fear. The overwhelming, oppressive heat of this world was not a threat. It was a homecoming. He felt a deep, instinctual kinship with the colossal being before him, a pull toward the raw, unrestrained power. A stray ember, carried on a superheated updraft from the volcano's crater, drifted toward him. It was the size of his head, a swirling ball of liquid fire that would have vaporized any mortal creature. Naruto didn't flinch. He reached out a small, semi-corporeal hand and touched it. There was no sizzle, no burn. Instead, the ember dissolved into him, its energy absorbed without a trace. Naruto's own internal light flared, growing visibly brighter and more stable for a moment. The crimson within him deepening to a fierce, volcanic red. Igneel's golden eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The rumbling in his chest shifted from amusement to genuine interest. HMPH. Perhaps the old constellation is not as foolish as he appears. Very well. The lesson begins now. The portal to the celestial realm snapped shut, leaving Naruto alone in a world of fire and shadow with his new father. Life in Igneel's domain was a brutalist education. There were no books, no lectures. There was only the primal, unforgiving reality of a world forged in fire. Igneel's method of teaching was immersion. He taught Naruto to breathe, not by explaining the mechanics of lungs, but by pushing him into a sealed cavern filled with toxic volcanic gases and commanding him to find the air within the poison. Naruto, choking and desperate, learned to filter the sulfur, to extract the oxygen, and in doing so, discovered his lungs were far more than simple bags of flesh. They were furnaces, capable of refining the very elements. The art of breathing fire was not about expectorating flames. It was a lesson in geology and connection. The world is a fire dragon, boy. Igneel's voice would echo through the mountains. Its heart is a core of molten fury. Feel it. Draw it up through your feet. Let it mingle with the fire in your soul. The flames you release are not yours alone. They are the planet's rage, given voice. Naruto would stand barefoot on a cooling lava flow, his small body rigid with concentration, feeling the immense geothermal energy vibrating up through his legs. His first successful fire breath wasn't a puff of smoke but a directed gout of plasma that flash melted a 10-ton boulder into slag. His education in dragon-slaying magic was a paradox. To defeat a dragon, you must first become one, Igneel explained, his vast head resting on a cliff ledge as he watched Naruto practice. You must understand its pride, its power, its overwhelming presence. But you must also see what it cannot. The flaw in perfection, the weakness in absolute strength. Dragon slaying is not about hatred. It is about supreme, predatory understanding. Igneel would hunt with him. They would pursue the lava golems that roamed the ashen plains. Igneel could have obliterated them with a single breath, but he would force Naruto to observe. To see how the golem's left side was slower to reform after a blow due to an imbalance in its molten core. To understand how to use the environment, to trigger a rockslide or divert a lava flow to cripple the creature before striking the final blow. It was a masterclass in strategy, in turning overwhelming odds into a calculated victory. His senses were honed to an impossible edge. Igneel would abandon him in the deepest, darkest, soundless caverns miles beneath the surface. To find his way back, Naruto couldn't rely on sight or sound. He learned to feel the subtle shifts in air pressure that betrayed a distant tunnel. He learned to taste the mineral content in the air to identify his location. He learned to read the vibrations in the stone, to feel the distant footsteps of a cave wyrm or the slow, grinding shift of tectonic plates. He became a part of the violent, vibrant world, his senses an extension of the planet itself. Amidst the brutal training, there were moments that transcended the master-student dynamic. At night, when the ash-choked sky revealed the unfamiliar, alien constellations of this dimension, Igneel would shelter the boy from the chilling winds. He would coil his colossal form around the small cave Naruto used for sleep, his body a living wall of warm, protective scales. He didn't tell bedtime stories with words. He would breathe a gentle, controlled flame onto the cave wall, and within the dancing fire, images would form. He showed Naruto the birth of his world from a cosmic collision. He showed him ancient, forgotten dragons, their scales like emeralds, sapphires, and diamonds, soaring through primordial skies. He showed him titanic battles that shattered continents. It was a history lesson painted in fire, a silent testament to a bond that was growing deeper than mere instruction. This was the love of a dragon, vast, silent, and intensely warm. Naruto was 8 when Igneel brought another being into their secluded existence. He returned from a rare journey to the dimension's edge, his massive claws gently curled around a small, fragile form. It was a little girl with vibrant, sky-blue hair and wide, terrified brown eyes. She was clutching a tattered piece of cloth and trembling uncontrollably. Her scent a strange mixture of rain, wind, and profound loss. "This is Wendy." Igneel's voice was uncharacteristically soft, a low rumble that barely stirred the air. "Her own dragon, Grandini, is gone. She will stay with us." Naruto, who had just successfully wrestled a magma serpent into submission, stood covered in soot and minor burns, his golden red aura of power a visible shimmer around him. He was a being of intense confidence, of fire and will. And he had absolutely no idea what to do with the tiny, weeping creature before him. He stared at her, his head cocked with the same analytical curiosity he might afford a new type of crystal formation. Wendy, in turn, was petrified. She had just lost her entire world, and now she was faced with a boy who seemed to be literally on fire and a dragon the size of a mountain range. It was too much. She curled into a tighter ball and sobbed. His first instinct was to demonstrate his strength, to show her she was safe with someone so powerful. He inhaled, ready to blast a celebratory jet of fire at the sky. But then, Igneel's lessons kicked in. Observe, understand the weakness in absolute strength. He saw her flinch from his heat, her tears evaporating before they could trace paths down her dirty cheeks. His power, his very presence, was terrifying to her. It was a flaw in his approach. He too, took a deep breath and deliberately suppressed his fiery aura, banking the flames within his soul. He sat down on the ground, making himself smaller. He remembered Igneel's fire stories and had an idea. He held out his palm, and instead of a raging inferno, he summoned a tiny, controlled flame. He shaped it, molding the fire with his will, making it dance and flicker. It took the form of a small, fiery butterfly, fluttering silently in the dim cavern. He made another, and another, until a small swarm of harmless, warm light sprites were dancing around him. Wendy's sobbing hitched. She peeked through her fingers, her large brown eyes fixated on the gentle, mesmerizing display. The light was warm, not threatening. Naruto gently nudged one of the fire sprites with his finger, sending it drifting slowly toward her. It hovered before her face, its light casting a soft, golden glow on her tear-streaked skin. Hesitantly, she reached out a small, trembling finger and poked it. It dissolved in a harmless shower of warm sparks. A tiny, watery giggle escaped her lips. In that moment, a new bond was forged. Naruto became her protector, her big brother. He used his enhanced senses not for hunting, but to find the subterranean groves where sweet, crystal-clear mushrooms grew, which she loved. He used his control over fire not for combat, but to keep her warm at night, creating a gentle, steady heat that mimicked the warmth of the sky dragon she'd lost. Wendy, in turn, began to open up. She told him about Grandini, about the magic of the sky, of healing and support. They were two orphans of different dragons, finding a new family in a world of fire and stone. Their communication became a unique hybrid. Her quiet, shy words and his more direct, action-oriented responses, all underscored by a shared understanding of the strange magic that flowed through their veins. The idol, however, was destined to be as fleeting as a dream upon waking. A subtle change began to creep into their world. The fire in Igneel's heart, a flame that had always seemed eternal, began to feel strained. The images he painted in the fire at night became darker, more troubled. He showed them a dragon unlike any other, a beast of pure abyssal darkness, its scales the color of a starless void, its wings vast enough to eclipse the sun. He showed this shadow dragon slaughtering his brethren, their vibrant elemental flames extinguished by its overwhelming darkness. The name, a word of pure dread, was burned into Naruto's mind, Acknowledge. The end came without warning. It was not an invasion, but a fundamental violation of reality. The sky above their volcanic home didn't just darken, it tore. A jagged, shrieking wound of pure chaos ripped across the dimension, a vortex of colors that didn't exist and sounds that drove lesser creatures mad. Through the rift, the cool, orderly light of the celestial realm spilled, but it was frantic, panicked. The celestial spirit king's voice echoed, not as a calm pulse of thought, but as a desperate, thundering shout that spanned dimensions. The timelines are collapsing. Acknowledge's madness is unraveling creation itself. He is consuming the spaces between worlds. Igneel, you must send them now. Igneel rose to his full, terrifying height, a roar of defiance shaking the very mountains to their roots. But it was a roar tinged with desperation. The shadow Ey had seen in the fire stories was manifesting at the edge of their dimension, a presence so vast and malevolent it made their world feel like a fragile bubble. There was no time for long goodbyes. There was only the final, desperate act of a father. Igneel moved with a speed that defied his size. He swept Naruto and Wendy up in his great claws, his touch surprisingly gentle. He enveloped them in a sphere of his own primal fire, a protective cocoon of life-giving flame. At the same time, a stream of pure, golden celestial energy flowed from the rift, weaving itself around the fire, reinforcing it, stabilizing it. It was a perfect fusion of their powers, a final, collaborative act of parenthood. Igneel pressed his massive snout against the sphere, his molten gold eye, an orb larger than both children combined, filled with an ancient, heart-breaking sorrow. His final words were not spoken, but branded directly onto Naruto's soul. Live, my son. Live, my daughter. Grow strong. Become the bridge. Become the hope. Do not let the flame go out. With a final, desperate heave, he thrust the protective sphere toward the chaotic portal. As it flew, Naruto looked back through the walls of fire and starlight. He saw Igneel turn to face the encroaching darkness. He saw the shadow of Acknowledge, a monstrous silhouette of pure hatred, descend upon his world. He saw his father, the Fire Dragon King, open his mouth and unleash a torrent of sun-bright flame, a final, defiant stand against the all-consuming night. Then the portal took them. The journey was a sensory nightmare. They were tumbling through an abyss. A torrent of screaming colors, impossible geometries, and the deafening roar of collapsing realities. Naruto, his instincts taking over, pulled the smaller, unconscious form of Wendy closer, shielding her with his own body. His dragon fire and the celestial energy gifted to him by the Star King flared instinctively, a dual-layered shield against the chaos trying to tear them apart. He gritted his teeth, enduring the metaphysical agony, his only thought the command branded into his soul, live. The violent tumbling ceased as abruptly as it began. They were spat out of the vortex, their protective sphere dissolving into harmless sparks moments before impact. There was a crash, the sound of splintering wood and rustling leaves, and then, silence. Naruto pushed himself up, his body bruised but unbroken. The air was wrong. It was thin, cold, and wet. It smelled of damp earth, of pine, and of a million living things he had no name for. Above, a full, silver moon hung in a black sky, partially obscured by the canopy of a silent, alien forest. The ground was soft, yielding, covered in a blanket of damp leaves. He looked down. Wendy was curled beside him, unconscious but breathing steadily, her small face peaceful in the pale moonlight. For the first time in his memory, Naruto felt no ambient, geothermal heat rising from the ground. For the first time, he could not hear the heartbeat of the world. For the first time, he was truly, utterly alone. A deep, primal sense of uncertainty washed over him, a chilling sensation he had never known. But as he looked at the sleeping girl beside him, another feeling rose to meet it, burning away the cold. A fierce, unwavering determination. Igneel's last command. He was her protector. He was the son of a dragon and a king. He was their bridge, and his new life, in this strange, quiet world, had just begun. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Scent of Rain and Starlight. The world that greeted Naruto upon his return to full consciousness was an assault of subtlety. Where his previous home screamed with the fury of a planetary forge, this place whispered. A gentle, persistent coolness clung to the air, carrying the complex bouquet of decaying leaves, damp soil, and the sharp, clean scent of pine. It was a stark, almost deafening silence compared to the constant, rumbling heartbeat of Igneel's domain. Here, the only rhythm was the soft, almost imperceptible sigh of the wind through the canopy high above, a lattice of black leaves against a sky of bruised purple and the first hints of dawn. He pushed himself to a sitting position, his movements fluid and silent, every muscle fiber already cataloging the new sensations. The ground was soft, yielding, a far cry from the unforgiving obsidian he was used to. He turned his attention immediately to Wendy. She was still asleep, her breathing a soft, steady whisper. Her sky-blue hair was fanned out against the dark earth, a splash of impossible color in the muted gloom of the forest. He reached out, his hand hovering just above her forehead. He wasn't checking for a fever. He was tasting the air around her, sampling the minute electrical signals of her nervous system. A trick of the senses Igneel had taught him for tracking subterranean creatures. She was unharmed, merely exhausted by their traumatic trans-dimensional journey. A knot of tension he hadn't realized he was holding in his chest loosened. His first and most important duty was intact. With Wendy's safety confirmed, he expanded his awareness, his senses reaching out like invisible tendrils. He closed his eyes, focusing. The cool, damp air told him water was near, and plentiful. The scent of pine was dominant, but beneath it lay dozens of others. The faint, musky odor of some small, nocturnal mammal burrowing nearby, the sweet, cloying smell of a flowering fungus he instinctively knew was poisonous, the clean, mineral tang of a rock formation to the east. He could hear the frantic, tiny heartbeat of a field mouse 100 yards away, the slow, methodical crawl of a beetle up a tree trunk behind him, the distant, mournful hoot of an owl. This forest was alive, but its life was quiet, hidden, and utterly alien. He rose to his feet, a faint, crimson gold aura shimmering around him for a moment before he consciously suppressed it, banking the internal furnace to a low ember. He had no idea what dangers this world held, and broadcasting his presence felt like a strategic error. Igneel's lessons were a litany in his mind. Never assume you are the apex predator. A true dragon is master of its environment, and mastery begins with understanding. His first priority was shelter. A quick, sweeping glance, his eyes piercing the pre-dawn gloom with supernatural clarity, identified a SM. All overhang in the rock face he'd scented earlier, about 200 yards away. It wasn't a deep cave, but it was defensible from one direction and offered cover from the elements. He walked back to Wendy, his footsteps making no sound on the leafy ground. He gathered her up in his arms with a gentleness that belied his immense strength. She murmured in her sleep, instinctively curling into the familiar warmth of his body. Carrying her felt as natural as breathing. He secured their new temporary home in minutes. The overhang was dry, the rock radiating a residual, stony cold. He laid Wendy down on a bed of pine needles he'd gathered, their scent sharp and clean. Next, water. He followed the scent of moisture to a small, clear stream that chuckled and gurgled over smooth, mossy stones. He dipped his fingers in, tasting it. It was pure, cold, and carried traces of iron and quartz from its underground source. Safe. He brought water back in a makeshift container he fashioned from a large, sturdy leaf. Its edges folded and sealed with sticky pine sap, a simple trick of survival, but one executed with the innate, practiced ease of someone who had lived their entire life in a world where such skills were paramount. He left the water beside Wendy for when she woke. Food was the final immediate concern. He prowled the perimeter of their camp in an ever-widening circle, his senses on full alert. He ignored the brightly colored berries, nature's universal warning sign, and the unfamiliar fungi. Instead, his attention was drawn to the ground. He saw the subtle disturbance in the soil, the faint track of a root tuber. He dug with his bare hands, his fingers as strong as steel, and unearthed a cluster of starchy, potato-like vegetables. He smelled one, breaking it open. The scent was earthy and clean. Edible. He found a bush with small, dark nuts. He cracked one open with his thumb and forefinger, the shell splintering with a sharp snap. The meat inside was rich and oily, high in energy, perfect. Within an hour of their arrival, he had established a defensible shelter, secured a source of fresh water, and foraged enough food for several days. He worked with a silent, focused efficiency that was neither frantic nor hurried. It was the calm competence of a being utterly at home in the wild, regardless of which dimension that wilderness happened to be in. He was roasting the tubers over a small, smokeless fire, a controlled vortex of flame that hovered in a pit he dug, consuming its own smoke before it could rise, when Wendy began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and brown and filled with the initial, disoriented panic of waking in a strange place. Naruto. Her voice was a small, frightened whisper. He was by her side in an instant, handing her a warm tuber. "I'm here, Wendy. We're safe." She sat up, clutching the offered food, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. She looked around at the small, orderly camp, at the neatly stacked food, the water, the protective rock face behind them. Her panic subsided, replaced by a familiar sense of awe and security. This was Naruto. He always made things safe. "Where are we?" she asked, taking a small, hesitant bite of the tuber. Her eyes widened. It was delicious. "I don't know," Naruto admitted, his voice a low, calm rumble. He stared out into the forest, which was now beginning to brighten with the gray light of dawn. "Another world. Not mine. Not Igneel's. It feels quiet, softer." He looked back at her, his crimson eyes intense. "But we're alive. We'll honor his last command. We'll live." Wendy nodded, a fresh wave of grief washing over her as she remembered the sight of Igneel turning to face the darkness. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. Crying wouldn't help. She was a sky dragon slayer. She had her own role to play. She stood up and walked to the stream Naruto had found. "The water is clean," Naruto said, watching her. "I know," she replied softly. "But I can make it better." She knelt by the water's edge, her small hands hovering over the surface. A soft, teal-colored magical aura enveloped her. Sky Dragon's healing spell. The water in a small pool of tea stream began to glow with a gentle light. All impurities, even the microscopic ones Naruto couldn't sense, were purged. The water became not just clean, but restorative, imbued with a touch of her life-giving magic. It was a small act, but it was her contribution. It was them, together, surviving. They spent the next few days in a comfortable routine, a small island of order in a vast, unknown wilderness. Naruto hunted, explored, and secured their perimeter. Wendy maintained the camp, used her magic to heal the minor cuts and bruises from their landing, and began to catalog the local plant life. Her sky dragon magic giving her an innate sense of their properties. They spoke little of the past, of the fathers they had lost. The grief was too raw, a shared, silent weight between them. Instead, they focused on the present, on the task at hand. Their communication was a language of shared glances, of quiet understanding, of two parts of a single whole working in perfect, unspoken unison. On the third day, Naruto decided they needed more information than the forest could provide. "Staying here is safe, but it's stagnant," he announced, as he expertly skinned a large, rabbit-like creature he had caught. "We need to find this world's people. Understand its rules." Wendy looked up from the medicinal herbs she was sorting. "Is that wise? We don't know if they'll be friendly." "We won't be careless," Naruto assured her, his eyes glinting with unshakable confidence. "But we can't hide forever. Knowledge is as important as food and shelter." They set out at dawn the next day, traveling east, toward a strange, faint energy signature Naruto had felt on the edge of his senses since their arrival. It was a chaotic, discordant hum of countless individual energies, something he now believed to be a settlement of some kind. He moved through the dense undergrowth with the silence of a predator, Wendy following in his wake, her smaller form making it easy to keep up. After several hours of travel, the character of the forest began to change. The trees were older, larger, their branches gnarled and twisted into fantastical shapes. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of ozone and a palpable aura of latent magic. It was this that put Naruto on high alert. This wasn't the clean, natural energy of the forest. This was something different, something more concentrated and more dangerous. It was the smell of blood that he caught first. Faint, but sharp and unmistakable. Then, the sounds of a struggle. A panicked shout, the splintering of wood, and a deep, guttural roar that was decidedly unnatural. Naruto motioned for Wendy to hide behind the massive roots of an ancient tree. She did so without question, her trust in his judgment absolute. He moved forward, a shadow flitting between the trees. His senses narrowed to a fine point. He emerged into a clearing to a scene of controlled chaos. A brightly painted carriage, its side emblazoned with some kind of crest, was smashed against a tree. Its wheels broken. A few dozen feet away, a young woman with stunning blonde hair tied in a side ponytail was backed against a rock wall. She was dressed in practical, yet fashionable, traveling clothes and held a single, ornate silver key in her hand, which was glowing with a soft golden light. Before her, a hulking beast, a forest Vulcan, gibbered and roared. It was a 10-foot-tall ape-like creature with green fur, a viciously fanged face, and a massive club clutched in one oversized fist. Facing the beast, between it and the girl, was a figure that made Naruto pause. It was a man, or rather, a bull man, with immense muscles, a cow-print vest, and a large axe slung over his back. He had a nose ring and a confident, almost lecherous grin on his face. "Don't you worry your pretty little head, Lucy," the bull man bellowed, striking a dramatic pose. "Taurus is here to protect your movelous body." The girl, Lucy, sighed, a look of profound exasperation on her face. "Just stop it from breaking my carriage any more than it already has, Taurus. And stop with the puns." The Vulcan roared and charged. Taurus met it head-on, his brute strength a match for the creature's. They locked in a stalemate, the ground trembling under their struggle. Lucy, meanwhile, was looking visibly drained. The golden glow around her ki was flickering. Naruto could sense her magical energy, a bright, celestial light. But it was fading rapidly. She was holding the gate to this spirit world open through sheer willpower, and it was costing her. Naruto processed the scene in a nanosecond. The girl was a magic user. A summoner of some kind. Her power was linked to the keys on her belt. The bull spirit was strong, but clumsy. The Vulcan was all rage and brute force. And the girl was the weak link. Her magic was her lifeline, and it was about to snap. He didn't announce his presence. He didn't shout a challenge. He simply acted. He exploded from the tree line, not as a blur, but as a silent, instantaneous relocation. One moment he was at the edge of the clearing, the next he was beside the grappling monsters. Neither the Vulcan nor Taurus even registered his arrival before he struck. His target wasn't the creature's head or chest. Igneel's training echoed in his mind. All strength has a fulcrum. Find it. Break it. He saw it in the way the Vulcan shifted its weight. The overextended joint of its left knee. Fire Dragon's iron fist. His voice was a low growl. His fist, wreathed in a contained cyclone of crimson gold flame, didn't travel far. It was a short, brutal, efficient blow delivered with the force of a meteor. It connected with the Vulcan's knee with a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. There was no explosion, no wasted energy. Just a perfect, devastating transfer of kinetic force and focused heat. The Vulcan's leg folded at an impossible angle. It let out a shriek of agony, its charge broken, its balance gone. It staggered, and in that moment of vulnerability, Naruto's other hand shot out, grabbing the creature by the throat. He wasn't choking it, he simply lifted. The 10-foot-tall beast, weighing well over a ton, was hoisted into the air by one arm. Its legs kicking uselessly. With a grunt of exertion, Naruto spun once, building momentum, and hurled the monster through the air. It flew 100 yards before crashing through the foe. Rest canopy with the sound of a falling redwood, its shrieks fading into the distance. The clearing fell into an abrupt, stunned silence. Taurus stood gaping, his axe half drawn. Lucy's jaw was hanging open, her silver key clattering to the ground as the last of her magical energy gave out. With a small pop of golden light, Taurus vanished, his gate forcibly closed. Lucy stumbled back, her hand fling to her mouth as she stared at the boy who had just appeared from nowhere and dispatched a monster that had been giving her celestial spirit a hard time with casual, almost disdainful ease. He was tall for his apparent age, his body lean but clearly packed with corded muscle under his simple, soot-stained clothes. His spiky hair was a shocking shade of sun-bright blonde, and his eyes, his eyes were what held her transfixed. They were a piercing, burning crimson, pupils slitted like a cat's, and they radiated an aura of ancient power and unshakable confidence that seemed utterly at odds with his youthful face. A faint shimmer of heat distorted the air around him. Naruto ignored her, his attention focused on the direction he'd thrown the Vulcan. He could still hear it crashing through the undergrowth, injured but not dead. He considered for a moment whether he should pursue it and finish the job, but decided against it. It was no longer a threat. He turned his crimson gaze on Lucy. "This is your territory?" he asked, his voice calm and direct, devoid of any boasting or preamble. Lucy blinked, trying to process the question. My territory. No, I was just passing through. On my way to Harjan for a job." Harjan. Naruto repeated the word, tasting it. It meant nothing to him. "Is that a settlement? A city?" "It's a port town," she said, her voice still shaky. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. She was a mage of fairy tale, after all. She wasn't supposed to be this easily flustered. "Look, thank you. You saved me. That Vulcan was tougher than I expected." Naruto gave a slight nod, accepting her thanks as a simple statement of fact. "Your power is celestial. It feels familiar." Lucy's eyes widened. No one had ever described her magic like that. "I'm a celestial wizard, yes. How could you possibly know that?" She looked at him more closely, and for the first time, she sensed it. Beneath the overwhelming scent of fire, cinders, and wildness, there was another energy radiating from him. It was faint, but unmistakable to her senses. It was a deep, resonant hum that felt like the music of the spheres, an echo of the celestial spirit world itself. It was ancient, powerful, and it made the spirits of her golden keys, still hanging on her belt, vibrate with a strange, sympathetic energy. What are you?" she breathed, our fear being rapidly replaced by an insatiable curiosity. Before Naruto could answer, Wendy, having decided the danger was over, cautiously emerged from behind the tree roots. Seeing the other girl, she gave a small, shy wave. Lucy's attention immediately snapped to the small, blue-haired child. All thoughts of overwhelming power and celestial mysteries vanished, replaced by a surge of protective instinct. "A little girl, was she with you this whole time? Are you two okay?" "We're fine," Naruto said simply. He walked over to the broken carriage, placing a hand on the shattered axle. He probed it for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, to Lucy's utter astonishment, a soft golden light enveloped his hand. It wasn't fire. It was the pure, orderly light of the stars. It flowed into the wood and metal, and with a low groan, the shattered pieces began to knit themselves back together, the axle reforming into its original, unbroken state. It was a crude repair, but it would hold. Lucy stared, completely speechless. Fire magic, unbelievable physical strength, and now, some kind of creation or mending magic that felt purely celestial. This boy was an impossibility. He turned back to her, dusting his hands off. "Your carriage is fixed. It should get you to this, Harjan." He paused, his crimson eyes locking with her brown ones. "In exchange for my help, and this repair, I want information. Tell us everything you know about this world. Its name, its geography, its rulers, and its magic." It was not a request. It was a calm, reasonable, and utterly non-negotiable demand. Lucy looked from the impossibly strong, impossibly handsome boy with eyes of fire to the adorable, shy girl hiding behind his leg. They were powerful, lost, and completely ignorant of the world they were in. And she, Lucy Heartfilia, had just been rescued by them. There was only one thing a proper mage of fairy tale could do. "Of course," she said, a brilliant smile finally breaking through her shock. "My name is Lucy, and that little one is Wendy, right? It's a pleasure to meet you both." She looked at Naruto, her gaze filled with a mixture of gratitude, awe, and a burgeoning fascination she couldn't quite explain. "I'll tell you everything. In fact, why don't you come with me to Harjan? It's safer than the woods, and I can introduce you to some people." "It's the least I can do." Naruto considered her offer for a moment. He tasted the air around her, sensed the flow of her magic, and looked into her eyes. He detected no deception, only genuine sincerity and a powerful curiosity. She was a source of information. And a potential guide. His own internal compass, the one honed by a lifetime of survival, told him she could be trusted. "We accept," he said. The sun was now fully risen, casting long, golden shafts of light through the forest canopy. The trio, the celestial dragon, the sky maiden, and the stellar wizard, began their walk down the path toward the port town of Harjan. Leaving the shadows and the wreckage of the battle behind them, Lucy found herself constantly sneaking glances at the silent, confident boy walking beside her, 1,000 questions bubbling in her mind. He was a complete enigma, a paradox of devastating power and quiet intensity, and she felt a strange, inexplicable pull toward him, a feeling as mysterious and compelling as the distant stars themselves. Their journey had just begun. But already, the constellations of their fates were beginning to align. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Port of Lies and the Night of Truth. The transition from the primal, untamed wilderness to the structured chaos of human civilization was a jarring symphony of sensation. Long before they saw the port town of Harjan, Naruto could taste it on the wind. The clean, earthy scent of the forest was gradually tainted, then overwhelmed, by a complex and potent mixture of salt, brine, drying fish, creosote, and the faint, collective metallic tang of a large number of people packed into a confined space. The gentle rustle of leaves was replaced by a low, persistent hum that grew into a cacophony of voices, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the creak of ship's rigging, and the incessant, greedy cries of gulls. For Wendy, the sheer volume of noise was overwhelming, and she instinctively moved closer to Naruto's side, his calm, steady presence a SMALL island of tranquility in the sensory storm. For Lucy, it was the smell of home, not a specific place, but the general, bustling energy of society, a stark and welcome contrast to the lonely terror of the forest. "So, this is Fury," Naruto stated, his crimson eyes sweeping across the vista as they crested the final hill. Harjan lay nestled in a natural harbor below them, a sprawling collection of whitewashed buildings with red-tiled roofs, all clustered around a series of docks where ships of every shape and size were moored like resting water birds. The sea beyond was a vast, glittering expanse of sapphire blue under the brilliant morning sun. His perception, however, went deeper than the picturesque view. He could feel the thrum of countless lives, a chaotic web of magical energies, emotions, and intentions. It was messy, discordant, and utterly unlike the monolithic, singular purpose of Igneel's domain or the perfect, mathematical order of the celestial realm. It was complicated. The kingdom of Fury, yes, Lucy corrected, a note of pride in her voice. She had spent the last hour of their walk providing a crash course on the basics of their world, a task she found both thrilling and surreal. We're on the southern coast. Fury is a neutral country, with a population of about 17 million. The government is a monarchy, but the real power, day to day, is held by the Magic Council, which governs all the magical guilds. Guilds, Naruto repeated the word, tasting its structure. Organized collectives of mages, you said. They take jobs for jewels, the currency. Exactly. And the best of the best. The most famous, powerful, and, well, the most destructive guild in all of Fury is Fairy Tail. Lucy's eyes sparkled with an almost religious fervor, a fount of pure, unadulterated adoration. They're legendary. Their mages are incredibly strong, but they're also like a huge, chaotic family. They're always getting in trouble with the council for property damage. But it's only because they go all out for their friends and their jobs. Oh, I'd give anything to join them. Naruto listened, absorbing the information without comment. He filed away the concepts. Monarchy, council, guilds, currency. It was the framework of this new world, the rules of the game he now had to play. He could sense the genuine passion in Lucy's voice, a powerful current of longing and ambition. It was a clean, pure energy. And he found he respected it. As they descended into the town proper, the sensory input intensified. The streets were cobbled and narrow, crowded with sailors, merchants hawking their wares in loud, sing-song voices, and townsfolk going about their daily business. The air was thick with the smell of baking bread from one shop, the pungent aroma of spices from another, and the ever-present scent of the sea. Naruto's senses, honed in a world of primal threats, were on a razor's edge, cataloging everything. He noted the two rune knights of the Magic Council standing guard near the main gate. Their magical energy a calm, disciplined blue, but their posture lax, their attention diverted by a passing woman. He noted the pickpocket, a young boy with furtive eyes and energy that smelled of desperation, smoothly lifting a wallet from a wealthy merchant absorbed in examining a bolt of silk. He let it go. It wasn't his fight. His focus was on threats, and while the town was chaotic, he sensed no immediate danger. Wendy, however, was finding it much more difficult. She clutched the back of Naruto's simple tunic, her head down, trying to make herself as small as possible. Every loud shout made her jump, every jostle from a passerby felt like a blow. After a lifetime spent in the quiet solitude of a dragon's care, this was a terrifying immersion into a sea of strangers. Naruto, without breaking stride or looking down, reached back and gently took her hand. His grip was firm, warm, and reassuring. He didn't speak, but the message was clear: I am here. You are safe. Wendy's frantic heartbeat slowed, her breathing steadied. She focused on the feeling of his hand in hers, a solid anchor in the swirling tide of the crowd, and found that she could walk a little taller. It was Lucy who led them towards the town center, chattering excitedly about a magic shop she wanted to visit. They say this shop gets all the latest magical items from the capital, Crocus. Maybe they'll have a new gate key. Oh, wouldn't that be amazing? A new spirit to make a contract with. Her excited monologue was cut short by a sudden surge in the crowd. A group of young women, their eyes glazed over with expressions of mindless adoration, were squealing and pushing their way towards a small plaza. At the center of the commotion stood a man in an ostentatious cape, with slicked back purple hair and a self-satisfied smirk. Rings adorned every finger, and a prominent tattoo was visible on his arm. It is I, the great salamander of fairy tale, the man announced, his voice dripping with a practiced, oily charm. And I have returned to Harjan to grace you all with my presence. The squeals from the assembled women intensified. Lucy's eyes went wide, her jaw dropping. Salamander. From fairy tale. Here. No way. It must be fate. He's a famous fire mage who uses a rare and powerful magic that you can't even learn from a book. Naruto's head tilted slightly, his crimson eyes narrowing. He focused on the man, his senses dissecting the scene with cold, analytical precision. The first thing he noticed was the magic. It was there, a faint, pinkish aura emanating from one of the man's rings. It was a charm spell, crude and weak, but effective on minds not trained to resist it. It washed over Naruto and Wendy without any effect whatsoever. It was like a gentle breeze trying to push over a mountain. But that wasn't what truly caught his attention. He smelled the man. Beneath the cloying scent of cheap cologne, he smelled of sweat, of stale wine, and of a deep, pervasive fear. There was no scent of fire about him. Not the primal, all-consuming inferno of a true fire dragon, nor the focused, disciplined heat of a trained fire mage. There was nothing. He was a fraud. And there was something else. A third scent, clinging to the charmed women like a parasite. It was a subtle, chemical odor, something designed to be inhaled, to lower inhibitions and mock the mind more susceptible to suggestion. A drug. He is not a fire mage, Naruto said, his voice a low, flat statement of fact that cut through Lucy's star-struck haze. Lucy blinked, turning to him. What? How can you say that? He's salamander. I am the son of the fire dragon king, Naruto replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. I know the scent of fire. That man smells of cheap perfume and deceit. He is lying. His absolute certainty was so powerful, so unshakable, that it momentarily shattered the charm's hold on Lucy. She looked back at the man, really looked at him this time. Past the glamour and the reputation she had built up in her head. She saw the shifty eyes, the way his smile didn't quite reach them. She saw the cheap fabric of his cloak. And she realized Naruto was right. The disappointment was a sharp, painful pang. Oh, was all she could say, her shoulders slumping. You're right. He's just some creep using a magic ring. The fake salamander, whose name was Bora, noticed their small group was unaffected by his charm. His eyes lingered on Lucy for a moment, his gaze turning slimy and possessive, before he dismissed them and turned his attention back to his adoring fans. Inviting them all to a party on his yacht that evening. Let's go, Naruto said, turning away. He is not worth our time. But as they walked away, Naruto's senses remained locked on the man. The pieces were clicking into place with a grim logic. A charm spell, a susceptibility-enhancing drug, an invitation to a party on a ship. This wasn't just a simple con artist trying to impress women. This was a predator setting a trap. He slowed his pace, letting Lucy and Wendy walk a few steps ahead as he subtly scanned the crowd. He spotted them within seconds. 2 other men, trying to blend in with the crowd. But their energy signatures reeked of the same cheap, dark magic as Bora. They were his accomplices, watching the crowd, identifying potential targets. Their gazes also lingered on Lucy. They reached the magic item shop, a cluttered and dusty place filled with strange artifacts and glowing lacquers. Lucy, her earlier disappointment temporarily forgotten in the face of her passion, began excitedly browsing the shelves. Wendy, fascinated by the strange and colorful items, timidly followed her. Naruto, however, remained near the entrance, his back to the interior of the shop. His senses extended out into the street. He was tracking Bora and his men. He felt them move away from the plaza, their path winding through the back alleys of Harjan. "Is something wrong, Naruto?" Wendy asked, coming over to him. She had noticed his tension, the subtle shift in his posture that she had come to recognize as his hunting stance. "The man from the plaza," Naruto said quietly. His eyes focused on something 100 yards down the street. "He is not just a liar. He is a kidnapper. He plans to take those women, and Lucy, on his ship and sell them." Wendy's eyes widened in horror. "Sell them? Like objects?" Quote, "Yes." The word was cold, hard, and final. He had seen it in the fire stories Igneel had shown him, the greed and cruelty that the lesser races were capable of. It was a concept he found both disgusting and illogical. Lucy came bounding over, holding a small, silver key. "Look, I got it. The Canis Minor Gate key. It was 75% off." Old man KB was so sweet, she trailed off. Seeing the grim expressions on their faces. "What is it? What's wrong?" Naruto turned to her, his gaze direct and serious. "The man calling himself Salamander. He is a slaver. He intends to abduct you and the other women at his party tonight." Lucy's bubbly demeanor evaporated, replaced by a cold knot of fear in her stomach. She thought back to the way he had looked at her. The possessive glint in his eyes. It all made a horrible kind of sense. "A slaver, here in Harjan. His accomplices are following us," Naruto added, without even glancing over his shoulder. "They have been since we left the plaza. They are waiting for an opportunity to isolate you." Just then, a figure stepped out of a side alley, blocking their path. She was a tall, striking woman clad in shining plate armor. With a determined jaw and magnificent, scarlet hair that flowed down her back like a river of blood. Her magical aura was immense, a vast, powerful, and incredibly disciplined sea of raw energy that dwarfed anyone else's in the town. It was the energy of a true titan, sharp and honed like the finest blade. In her hand, she carried a simple notice. "I am looking for a man," she said, her voice clear, commanding, and utterly devoid of pleasantries. She held up the notice, which bore a poorly drawn, but recognizable, sketch of Bora. "He is a deserter from the Titania Guild. Goes by the name Bora the Prominence. He is wanted for larceny, assault, and suspicion of involvement in human trafficking. Have you seen him?" Naruto met the armored woman's gaze. His senses flared, analyzing her. He felt the immense power, but also the unshakable conviction beneath it. Her energy was like a perfectly forged sword. No wasted heat, no extraneous motion, just pure, focused intent. This was a warrior, a real one. Her scent was of steel, of ozone from magic use, and of something else, a faint, lingering scent of strawberries. "We have," Naruto said simply. He gestured with his head, a subtle movement toward a rooftop across the street. "2 of his men are there. Bora himself is in the tavern 2 blocks north, the one with the broken sign." The scarlet-haired woman's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't sensed the men on the roof. She looked at the young man before her, truly taking him in for the first time. The raw power coming off him was like a physical force, a contained inferno that made the air around him shimmer. It was untamed, wild, and yet, there was a core of absolute control at its center. And something else, a strange, ancient resonance that felt like staring into the night sky. She had never felt anything like it. "You have impressive senses," she said, her tone shifting from commanding to one of professional respect. "My name is Urza Scarlet. I am a mage of the Fairy Tale Guild." At the words, "fairy tale," Lucy audibly gasped, her eyes turning into wide, shining saucers. This was a real fairy tale mage. The power, the presence, the purpose. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. "He is planning to drug and abduct a dozen women tonight on his ship at the docks," Naruto continued, providing the intelligence with brisk efficiency. "He is using a low-level charm ring and an aerosol narcotic to make them compliant." Urza's expression hardened, her eyes turning to chips of cold, hard flint. "I had heard rumors. So they are true." She looked from Naruto to Lucy. Then to Wendy. "This is guild business now. It is too dangerous for civilians. I will handle it." "No," Naruto said. The word hung in the air, simple, absolute, and utterly defiant. Urza's eyebrow rose, a dangerous glint entering her eyes. Very few people had ever said no to her in that tone of voice and remained standing comfortably. "He targeted Lucy," Naruto explained, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of molten steel. "That makes it my business. You are a powerful warrior, but you are one person. They have the advantage of numbers and a prepared location. A direct assault is inefficient. We will dismantle his operation from the inside, and we will do it tonight." Urza stared at him, a silent battle of wills taking place between them. She was used to taking charge, to being the strongest person in any situation. But this unknown young man spoke with an authority that was not born of arrogance, but of absolute, factual competence. He wasn't challenging her, he was stating his intention. And it was clear that he would carry it out with or without her. She found herself, much to her own surprise, not angered, but intrigued. "What is your name?" she asked. "Naruto. And you believe you can help?" Naruto didn't answer with words. He held out his hand, palm up. For a split second, a miniature star, a swirling vortex of golden and crimson energy, ignited above his palm. It was a display of such raw, controlled power that Urza felt the breath catch in her throat. The heat was intense, yet it didn't singe the air. The light was blinding, yet it didn't hurt her eyes. It was a perfect, impossible contradiction. He held it for a moment, then extinguished it as if snuffing a candle. "I believe I can," he said simply. Urza was a woman of action and pragmatism. She had a mission, and an unexpected, impossibly powerful asset had just presented itself. To refuse his help would be illogical and detrimental to the goal of saving the captured women. "Very well, Naruto," she said, a slow, dangerous smile touching her lips. "Tell me your plan." The plan was simple, elegant, and ruthless. It utilized everyone's strengths perfectly. Lucy, to her initial terror and subsequent thrill, would be the bait. She would attend Bora's party, playing the part of a charmed, vapid fangirl. Wendy, whose sky dragon magic could purify the air, would be smug. Led aboard the ship beforehand by Naruto to a secure hiding place. At the critical moment, when Bora released his sleeping gas, Wendy would negate it, ensuring the captives remained conscious. Urza would create a diversion on the far side of the docks, drawing the attention of any of Bora's men who weren't on the ship. And Naruto would be the cataclysm. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the port, the plan went into motion. Lucy, dressed in a beautiful blue dress, nervously approached the yacht, her celestial keys hidden in her purse. She played her part beautifully, her acting skills honed by years of trying to get out of paying her rent. Bora, his ego preening, welcomed her aboard with a greasy smile, his eyes undressing her. Meanwhile, under the cover of darkness and the noise of the bustling port, Naruto moved. He carried Wendy on his back, his form a mere shadow that flitted across the rooftops. He leapt from a warehouse roof to the ship's mast, a 50-foot gap he crossed in a silent, effortless arc. He landed on the main mast's crosstree without a sound, not even causing the wood to creak. He deposited Wendy in the crow's nest, a small, sheltered spot that gave her a perfect view of the main deck. "You remember what to do?" he asked softly. Wendy nodded, her small face a mask of fierce determination. "When he uses the gas, I will use Sky Dragon's breath to clear the air." "I can do it, Naruto." Quote, "I know you can," he said, and the simple, absolute faith in his voice bolstered her more than any rousing speech could have. He gave her a reassuring pat on the head, then vanished back into the shadows of the rigging, positioning himself on the underside of the ship's bowsprit, a perfect, hidden vantage point from which to observe the entire deck. The party began. The music was loud, the wine flowed freely, and Bora lapped up the fawning attention of the dozen women he had lured aboard. Lucy, forcing a simpering smile, stayed close to him, subtly counting his men. There were 10 of them, burly and carrying concealed weapons. The ship slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to pull away from the dock. The trap was being sprung. Just as the ship cleared the harbor entrance, Urza made her move. A massive explosion of light and sound erupted from a warehouse at the far end of the docks. A pillar of pure magical energy shot into the sky as Urza, re-equipped into her Heaven's Wheel armor, launched 100 swords into the empty building. The diversion was spectacular, drawing the shouts and attention of everyone in the port. On the ship, Bora laughed. "Fools, let them enjoy the fireworks. We have our own party to attend to." He dropped his charming facade, his face twisting into a cruel sneer. He snapped his fingers. A thick, sweet-smelling gas began to hiss from hidden nozzles around the deck. "Sweet dreams, ladies. You'll wake up in Bosco." The women on deck began to cough, their eyes fluttering as the potent sleeping agent took effect. But just as they started to slump, a soft, clear voice called out from above. Sky Dragon's breath. Wendy, standing proudly in the crow's nest, inhaled deeply and released a swirling vortex of pure, clean air. It descended upon the deck like a miniature, contained tornado, instantly sucking up and neutralizing the purple gas, replacing it with fresh, revitalizing, oxygen-rich air. The women, instead of passing out, gasped, their minds clearing, confusion and fear dawning on their faces as they saw Bora's true expression. Bora stared up at Wendy in disbelief. "A child, where did you?" He never finished the sentence. A crimson gold streak shot from the front of the ship. Naruto moved with such devastating speed that he seemed to teleport. He appeared in the center of the 10 thugs, his body low to the ground. Fire Dragon's brilliant flame. It wasn't a roar, it was a whisper. He didn't unleash a torrent of fire. He released a 360-degree pulse of pure, concussive heat and kinetic force. It was an explosion with no flame, a shockwave that struck all 10 men simultaneously. They were lifted from their feet and hurled overboard into the cold ocean with synchronized splashes. Our bodies already unconscious from the sheer force of the blow before they hit the water. In the space of a single heartbeat, Bora was alone, facing down the boy with the burning crimson eyes. At the same time, Lucy swung into action. "Open, Gate of the Golden Bull." Taurus. With a flash of light, her powerful spirit appeared on deck. "I've been waiting for this moment, Lucy. Your body is looking spectacular tonight. Just keep the ship from getting away," Lucy commanded, pointing at the ship's wheel. Taurus charged, smashing the helm to splinters with a single swing of his axe. The ship was dead in the water. Bora, panicking, turned his full power on Naruto. "You brat, I am Salamander. You will burn." Prominence Typhoon. He shot a massive, swirling vortex of purple fire, real fire, this time, at Naruto. It was his strongest attack, a foul, chemically treated flame that was notoriously difficult to extinguish. Naruto didn't move. He didn't even bother to raise a hand to block. He simply stood there, his expression one of utter disdain, as the roaring inferno washed over him. The flames, upon touching his body, did not burn him. They parted around him, drawn towards him, before being absorbed into his very skin. In a matter of seconds, the entire attack had been consumed, leaving not so much as a scorch mark on his clothes. He took a deep breath, and a small, satisfied smile touched his lips. It was a foul, impure fire, but it was still fire. It was still a meal. Bora stared, his magic spent, his jaw hanging open in utter, abject terror. This boy, he ate his flames. "My turn," Naruto said, his voice dangerously soft. He took a single step forward, and the deck plating beneath his foot buckled from the sheer concentration of power. He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding, and the air around him superheated. Shimmering like a desert haze. Fire Dragon's roar. He unleashed it. It was not the clumsy, wild inferno of Bora's attack. It was a perfectly focused, concentrated beam of pure, sun-hot plasma. A torrent of energy so immense it looked as though he had torn a piece from the sun itself and spat it forth. It struck the water in front of the ship, not the ship itself, a deliberate, calculated act of intimidation. The entire harbor lit up as if it were midday. A massive column of steam erupted into the night sky with a deafening, concussive roar that was felt for miles. The front half of the yacht, while untouched by the flames themselves, was instantly vaporized by the sheer, overwhelming heat. The rest of the vessel was lifted out of the water by the fork of the explosion and tossed back towards the docks, where it crashed in a heap of splintered wood and torn sails. Silence descended, broken only by the hiss of steam and the distant sound of Urza finishing her own work. Naruto stood calmly amidst the wreckage, a faint trail of smoke curling from his lips, his crimson eyes glowing in the sudden darkness. The rescued women stared at him, not with fear, but with a profound, speechless awe. Lucy looked from the destroyed ship to the boy who had just unleashed a power greater than anything she had ever imagined, and her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This wasn't just strength. This was the power of a god. Urza arrived a moment later, leaping from the docks onto the wreckage. She surveyed the scene, the neutralized thugs being fished out of the water by the Rune Knights, the terrified but safe women, the utterly annihilated yacht, and the bound and whimpering form of Bora, who had fainted from sheer terror. She looked at Naruto, who stood there as if he had done nothing more strenuous than swatting a fly. "You have a destructive flair," she commented, her voice dry, but her eyes held a spark of deep, profound respect. Just like a true fairy tale mage. She cracked a small, genuine smile. "You know, our guild could use someone with your talents. And your friends," she added, nodding towards Wendy, who was being fussed over by the grateful women, and Lucy, who was still trying to get her brain to reboot. Lucy's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning, ecstatic hope. "Me, you mean?" Urza's smile widened. "Anyone who would willingly act as bait to save strangers and can command celestial spirits has the heart of a fairy tale mage. And any sky dragon slayer is a welcome addition. As for him," she looked back at Naruto, "Makarov will want to meet you. I insist." Naruto looked at the group before him. The fierce, honorable knight. The kind, brave stellar wizard. The gentle, strong sky maiden. He felt their collective energies, respect, gratitude, awe, and a burgeoning sense of camaraderie. He thought of Igneel's final command. Live, grow strong. Hiding in the forest was mere survival. This felt like living. "Fairy tale," he said, testing the name. It felt right. "Where is it?" Urza grinned, a full, brilliant expression of triumph. "Come with me. I'll take you home." Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Guild of Storms and the Hearth of Home. The magical train was a creature of tamed lightning and articulated steel, a concept so profoundly alien that Naruto found it more fascinating than the trans-dimensional vortex that had brought him to this world. He sat perfectly still by the window, his usual stoicism a mask for the intense sensory analysis he was conducting. He could feel the rhythmic pulse of the magical engine, a lacrima crystal the size of a carriage wheel, humming with a steady, controlled output of ethernano. He felt the minute vibrations traveling through the tracks, could taste the iron in the rails, and could hear the Doppler shift of the train's whistle as it passed through sun-dappled countryside. It was a marvel of applied principles, a system of interlocking laws and energies forced to serve a single, mundane purpose, travel. It was, in its own way, as ordered and precise as the celestial realm, yet as functional and powerful as one of Igneel's lesser flames. He found he approved of it. Across from him, Lucy was practically vibrating with excitement, a stark contrast to Naruto's focused stillness. She had her new Canis Minor key out, polishing it for the 10th time with a soft cloth. "I still can't believe it. I'm going to Fairy Tale. With Urza Scarlet. And you too. This is the best day of my entire life," she gushed, her brown yes sparkling with a light that rivaled the celestial energy of her own keys. Wendy, seated beside Naruto, offered a small, shy smile. The chaos of Harjan had been terrifying, but this enclosed, moving space felt safe. With Naruto on one side and the formidable, yet surprisingly gentle, Urza on the other, she felt more secure than she had since Grandini's disappearance. The rhythmic clatter of the train was almost soothing. Urza sat opposite Wendy, a portrait of disciplined composure. She had re-equipped out of her armor and into a simple blouse and skirt, yet she still radiated an aura of authority that discouraged any of the other passengers from sitting too close. She was observing Naruto with a thoughtful, analytical gaze. "You were remarkably calm," she noted, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise of the train. Most people experiencing a magical locomotive for the first time are either thrilled or nauseous. "It is a logical application of contained power," Naruto replied, his crimson eyes momentarily meeting hers in the reflection of the window. "The principles are sound. It is efficient." His response was so unexpected, so utterly devoid of the normal reactions she expected, that Urza found herself momentarily at a loss. He hadn't praised its speed or its comfort, he had analyzed its core function and judged it to be satisfactory, as a master artisan might critique the work of a student. The more time she spent with him, the more he resembled not a person, but a fundamental force of nature that had, for some inexplicable reason, decided to take a human form and learn to speak. Their quiet journey was shattered at the next stop. The door to their carriage slid open with a bang, and two figures stumbled in. One was a young man with wild, pink hair, a scaly white scarf wrapped around his neck, and a grin that was all feral energy and reckless abandon. The other was a small, blue, winged cat that flew in after him. "Finally, a train that's actually leaving," the pink-haired boy shouted to no one in particular. Then, his eyes fell on their group. His gaze, sharp and surprisingly perceptive, swept over Lucy, Wendy, and Urza before landing on Naruto. He froze, his nose twitching, his head cocked to the side like a curious wolf. "Fire!" the boy whispered, his grin fading, replaced by an expression of intense, primal recognition. Before he could say another word, the train gave a lurch and began to pull away from the station. The effect on the boy was instantaneous and catastrophic. His face turned a shade of sickly green, his confident posture dissolved, and he collapsed into a nearby seat, groaning. "Uura. Can't move, the world is spinning." The blue cat floated over to him, shaking its head with a sigh. "Honestly, Natsu, you know you can't handle transportation. You're such a child." The cat then noticed Lucy and gave her a cheerful wave of its paw. "Hello there. My name is Happy." Lucy stared, her brain trying to process the sudden appearance of a talking, flying cat. It can talk." Sir," Happy chirped happily. Wendy, however, was looking at the groaning boy, Natsu, with a sympathetic expression. She had learned many kinds of magic from Grandini. Not just combat spells, but spells of support and healing. She recognized the symptoms of extreme motion sickness. She slid off her seat and timidly approached him. Excuse me," she said softly. Natsu merely groaned in response. "I think I can help with that. It's a support spell. It's very effective for motion sickness." She placed her hands over his head, a soft, teal aura enveloping them. Troya. A gentle, swirling light flowed from her palms into Natsu's body. For a moment, the green tint to his face subsided. He sat up, blinking, a look of profound relief on his face. "Whoa, it's gone. The sickness is gone. You're amazing," he exclaimed, his energy returning in a sudden, explosive rush. He beamed at Wendy, a wide, genuine smile that made her blush and take a shy step back. But the relief was short-lived. The Troya spell was powerful, but Natsu's motion sickness was legendary, a fundamental flaw in his Dragon Slayer physiology. After about a minute, a faint green tinge began to creep back into his cheeks. He groaned and slumped back down. It's coming back." Wendy looked crestfallen. "Oh, I'm sorry. It usually lasts longer than that." Naruto, who had been observing the entire interaction with silent intensity, spoke for the first time. His inner ear and his draconic senses are in conflict. His body feels the motion, but his instincts tell him he should be flying, that the world should not be moving beneath him. Your magic temporarily realigns that conflict, but his nature is too strong. It reasserts itself. He looked at Natsu, not with pity, but with a diagnosing, clinical gaze. "It is a flaw in your design." Natsu, despite his nausea, managed to glare at Naruto. The words, "flaw in your design," struck a nerve. But it was the other thing Naruto had said that truly caught his attention. He forced himself to focus, to push past the debilitating sickness. He sniffed the air again, more deeply this time. It was faint, almost completely suppressed. But it was unmistakably there. The scent of a fire dragon. It was different from his own, ancient and powerful in a way that made the hairs on his arms stand on end, but it was the same fundamental scent as his own lost father, Igneel. You, Natsu managed to choke out, pointing a shaky finger at Naruto. You smell like Igneel. The name hit Naruto with the force of a physical blow. A flicker of raw, molten emotion crossed his face, so quick that only Urza, with her warrior's instincts, caught it. The air in the carriage instantly grew 10 degrees warmer. You know that name, Naruto stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Know him. He was my dad. Natsu shot back, his sickness momentarily forgotten in the face of this shocking connection. He raised me, taught me dragon-slaying magic. Then he disappeared on July 7th, year 777. Wendy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's the same day Grandini disappeared. A heavy silence fell over the group. 2 other children raised by dragons. 2 other orphans left behind on the exact same day. The coincidence was too great, too statistically impossible to be chance. It was a pattern, a design. Naruto's internal inferno cooled, his momentary anger replaced by a torrent of questions. He looked at Natsu, truly seeing him now not as a loud, sick boy, but as a kindred spirit, another piece of the same cosmic puzzle he found himself in. He was my father, too, Naruto said, his voice quiet but resonant with the weight of that truth. The rest of the journey passed in a haze of shared stories and stunned revelations. Natsu, despite his recurring bouts of sickness, eagerly explained his life with Igneel, the training, the love, the sudden, inexplicable loss. Wendy shared her own, gentler memories of Grandini. Naruto listened, contributing little, but absorbing every word. He spoke of Igneel's domain of fire and stone, a description that made Natsu's eyes widen, for it was the same world he remembered. They were brothers, in a way that transcended blood. They were sons of the same magnificent, fiery being. By the time the train pulled into the station at Magnolia, a new, strange, and powerful bond had been forged between the 3 dragon slayers. Magnolia was a vibrant, cheerful town, its architecture a charming mix of medieval and modern styles. Magic was woven into the very fabric of the place, from the magically lit street lamps to the enchanted fountains in the town square. And on a hill overlooking the town, its banners flapping proudly in the breeze, stood a building that was impossible to miss. It was a sprawling, chaotic, and utterly magnificent structure, a fusion of a castle, a tavern, and a whimsical fantasy. The fairy tale guild hall. There it is, Urza said, a rare, soft smile on her face. Home. As they approached, the sounds from within grew louder. It wasn't the ordered hum of Harjan. It was a full-throated roar of life, a mixture of shouting, laughing, and the occasional inexplicable explosion. Natsu, now on solid ground and fully recovered, grinned. Sounds like they're having fun. Let's go. He kicked the massive double doors open with a jubilant shout. I'm back. The scene inside was one of glorious, unadulterated pandemonium. A full-scale brawl was in progress, encompassing the entire main hall. Tables were being thrown, chairs were being used as weapons, and blasts of multicolored magic were crisscrossing the air. At the center of it all, a half-naked man with dark blue hair was trading blows with a man wearing only his boxer shorts. A large, brutish man with white hair was yelling about being a real man, while a man in an orange fedora was trying to flirt with a woman who was drinking from a massive barrel of ale. It was a Renaissance painting of a bar fight. Lucy and Wendy froze in the doorway, their mouths agape in sheer shock. This was the most famous guild in Fury. It looked like a riot. But then, Urza stepped through the doorway behind them. She cleared her throat, a small, quiet sound that was somehow heard over the din. In an instant, the chaos ceased. The brawl stopped mid-punch. The man drinking from the barrel choked on his ale. The entire guild froze, turning their heads with the slow, terrified dread of a mouse that has just heard the hiss of a snake. A man with dark hair, now suddenly fully clothed, and the man in his boxers, gray fullbuster, slung their arms around a bewildered Natsu's shoulders. Urza, We're just being good friends, right Natsu? Gray said with a painfully forced smile. Natsu agreed, sweating profusely. Urza's gaze swept across the room, and the hardened, veteran mages of Fairy Tail flinched like naughty school children. Her authority here was absolute. I have returned, she announced. And I have brought guests. All eyes turned to the newcomers. Lucy felt 100 pairs of eyes on her and wanted to shrink, but she forced herself to stand tall. Wendy hid behind Naruto's leg. Naruto himself was unfazed. His senses were drinking in the details of the hall. He smelled the spilled ale, the old wood, the sweat of exertion, the unique ozone signature of dozens of different magical energies. But beneath it all, there was another scent, a unifying one. It was the smell of a hearth, of a den, of a shared space. It was the smell of a pack, a family, a woman with long, beautiful white hair and a gentle smile that could melt glaciers approached them from behind the bar. She wiped a glass with a cloth, her movements calm and graceful, a point of serenity in the boisterous hall. Welcome back, Urza, and welcome to Fairy Tail, all of you. Her voice was like soft music. Can I get you something to drink? Mirajan, Urza greeted her with a nod. She gestured to the newcomers. This is Lucy, Wendy, and Naruto. They will be joining us. Mirajan's blue eyes twinkled. She looked at each of them in turn, but her gaze lingered on Naruto. Most people, when they looked at him, saw the power. The intensity, the hint of danger. Mirajan saw something else. Her own takeover magic. Her Satan's soul gave her a unique perception of spiritual and demonic energies. She could feel the dragon within him, a slumbering volcano of immense power. But she also sensed the other half of his soul, the cold, vast, and achingly lonely order of the Celestial King. She saw a being of impossible contradictions, carrying the weight of 2 entire worlds within him. And her heart, the heart of a woman who understood monsters and hidden pain better than anyone, went out to him. It's a pleasure to meet you, Naruto, she said, and her smile was genuine, filled with a warmth and an understanding that he had not expected. It was then that Natsu, having finally been released from Gray's nervous grip, bounded forward, his eyes locked on Naruto, a fiery grin on his face. All right, enough with the introductions. You said Igneel was your dad, too. That means we've got a fight. To see who he taught better. The winner gets to be his true successor. A hush fell over the guild. A challenge had been issued. All eyes turned to Naruto, expecting a boast, a taunt, or an immediate acceptance. Naruto simply looked at Natsu, his expression unreadable. Why? Natsu blinked. What do you mean, why? To prove who's stronger, duh. We are both his sons, Naruto said, his voice calm and level. Our strength is his legacy. Proving one of us is stronger than the other is a pointless exercise. It dishonors his memory by turning his gift into a competition. Natsu was completely flummoxed by this logic. He was a creature of simple, direct action. You fought to prove things. That's how it worked. This philosophical response was beyond him. That's dumb. You're just scared to fight me. Come on. Put up your fists. To emphasize his point, Natsu took a deep breath, his cheeks puffing out as he gathered his magical energy. Fire dragons. Before he could unleash his attack, Urza's armored fist slammed down on top of his head, driving him face first into the floorboards with a loud crash. That is enough, Natsu. Do not attack our new members. But Urza, Natsu whined from the floor. Did I stutter? She asked, a menacing purple aura beginning to radiate from her. Natsu immediately went silent. Naruto watched the exchange, a faint glimmer of something, perhaps amusement. Perhaps curiosity, in his eyes. He looked around at the assembled mages. He saw their power, their rivalries, their bonds. He saw a chaotic, dysfunctional, and fiercely loyal family. Ahem. A new voice, small but carrying an undeniable weight of authority, echoed from the second-floor railing. Everyone in the guild immediately straightened up, their expressions turning to ones of deep respect. Standing on the railing was a diminutive old man, no taller than Wendy, with a white mustache and a comical, long hat. Despite his size, his presence seemed to fill the entire hall. This was Makarov Dreyar, the third master of Fairy Tail and one of the 10 wizard saints. So these are the new children Urza has brought us, Makarov said, his eyes twinkling as he looked them over. He hopped down from the railing, landing as lightly as a feather. He walked past Lucy and Wendy, giving them a warm, grandfatherly smile, before stopping directly in front of Naruto. He had to crane his neck to look up at him. The reports from the council about Harjin were impressive, Makarov said, his voice quiet, yet carrying a deep, rumbling power. They spoke of a force that vaporized half the harbor with a single breath. The guild members began to murmur amongst themselves, their eyes widening as they looked at Naruto with newfound awe and disbelief. I did what was necessary, Naruto replied simply. Makarov stared at him for a long, silent moment. The twinkle in his eyes was replaced by a look of profound, ancient wisdom. He was one of the few people in the world powerful and perceptive enough to sense the true nature of the being standing before him. He could feel the raging inferno of the Dragon King, a power that could reduce continents to ash. But he could also feel the other side, a power that was arguably even more terrifying, the cold, immutable, absolute law of the Celestial Spirit King. It was the power of creation and order, the fundamental grammar of reality itself. Fire and law, chaos and order, a walking, breathing paradox of cosmic proportions. Come with me, boy, Makarov said, his tone leaving no room for refusal. We need to talk, privately. He turned and headed for his office, leaving a stunned and silent guild hall in his wake. Naruto gave a brief, reassuring glance to Wendy, then followed the guild master without a word. Makarov's office was a cozy, cluttered room, filled with books and esoteric artifacts. The master climbed into his large chair, looking like a child playing in his father's seat. But when he spoke, his voice was that of a king. Do not bother with deception, Makarov began, his eyes locked on Naruto's. It would be an insult to us both. I can feel them, the dragon and the Star King. A pact I thought was only a myth from the age of creation. Tell me, who, and what, are you? Naruto stood in the center of the room, his presence seeming to shrink the space around him. He met Makarov's gaze and saw not just a powerful mage, but a being who understood the deeper currents of the world, who had looked into the abyss and had not flinched. He sensed no malice, only a deep, abiding concern for his family and the world they lived in. And so, for the first time since arriving in this world, he told the truth. He spoke of his dual creation, of the Celestial Spirit King's desire for a balance, and Igneel's desire for a success. Soar who could face the encroaching darkness. He spoke of his education in two different dimensions, learning the unbending laws of reality and the unrestrained will of the inferno. He spoke of Aknowledge, the dragon of the apocalypse, and the desperate, final act that had sent him and Wendy here. He spoke for 10 minutes, his voice a calm, steady monotone, yet the story he wove was one of cosmic significance. Of gods and dragons and the potential end of all things. When he finished, Makarov was silent for a long time, his eyes closed, his small hands steepled before him. The weight of Naruto's story settled in the room, heavy and profound. Finally, Makarov opened his eyes. They were filled not with fear, but with a deep, weary sadness, and a flicker of something else, hope. So the legends are true, he murmured. And the final battle is coming. He looked at Naruto, a new understanding in his gaze. You carry a burden that no child should ever have to bear. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. Then, his expression changed, the grandfatherly warmth returning to his eyes. But here, in this guild, you do not have to bear it alone. Here, you are not a cosmic weapon or a prophecy. Here, you are one of my children. You are family. You will learn to laugh, to fight with your comrades, to cry for them, and to live for them. That is the law of fairy tale. Can you accept that? Naruto considered the old man's words. Live for them. It was an extension of Igneel's last command. It was a purpose, a direction. I can, Naruto said. Makarov grinned, a wide, infectious expression. Good. Then it's settled. He hopped off his chair and grabbed the guild's official magic stamp. Now, where do you want your mark, and what color? This is the most important part. A few minutes later, Naruto re-entered the main hall. The guild members, who had been waiting with bated breath, fell silent. They watched as he walked over to where Wendy and Lucy were standing with Mirajan. He turned, And on the flared deltoid of his right shoulder was a brand new fairy tale guild mark. It was a deep, burning crimson, the exact color of his eyes, the color of his father's flames. A split second of silence. And then the entire guild erupted in a deafening cheer. Natsu, already recovered, jumped on a table, shooting a jet of fire into the air. We got a new member. This calls for a party. Gray started stripping out of habit. Kana, the woman with the barrel, challenged Urza to a drinking contest. Lucy was laughing, tears of joy in her eyes as Mirajan gently stamped a pink guild mark on the back of her right hand. Wendy, her fear finally gone, smiled brilliantly as a sky blue mark was placed on her right arm. Naruto stood in the middle of the maelstrom, an island of calm in the joyous chaos. He felt the unrestrained, chaotic energy of the celebration wash over him. He felt the genuine happiness, the fierce loyalty, the unspoken bonds that connected every person in this room. He felt the warmth of the hearth, the safety of the den. He had a pack now. He had a family, and for the first time in his very long, very strange existence, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. He was home. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Silent City and the Echoes of a Song. The boisterous, chaotic warmth of the fairy tale guild hall became the new bedrock of Naruto's existence. He found a strange, compelling rhythm in its pandemonium. Mornings were a cacophony of Natsu and Gray starting their daily, nonsensical brawls, which would inevitably escalate until Urza quelled them with a single, terrifying glare. Afternoons were a hum of activity as mages returned from jobs, boasting of their exploits, or departed on new ones, their spirits high. Evenings descended into raucous celebration, fueled by Mirajan's seemingly endless supply of ale and Kana's iron-clad liver. Through it all, Naruto was a point of quiet gravity. He claimed a small, round table in a corner of the hall. A strategic location that offered a clear view of all entrances and the main floor, yet was just outside the primary blast radius of the daily fights. He did not participate in the brawls, not out of fear, but out of a deep, instinctual understanding that to unleash even a fraction of his power in such a casual conflict would be catastrophic. His stillness, however, was not one of inaction. It was the stillness of a predator. His senses constantly engaged, analyzing, learning. He catalogued the unique magical signatures of every guild member, from the subtle, verdant energy of the plant mage Alzak to the sharp, metallic tang of the gunner Biska. He learned the guild's unwritten rules, the complex web of rivalries, friendships, and shared history that bound these disparate, powerful individuals into a family. His relationship with his two fellow dragon slayers solidified into a comfortable, unspoken routine. Wendy became his shadow, finding a profound sense of security in his quiet presence. She would often sit at his table, practicing her enchanting magic on small trinkets, her soft, teal aura a gentle contrast to the crimson gold that occasionally flickered at the edge of his vision. He, in turn, found her presence calming, a gentle sky breeze that soothed the raging inferno within him. He would often bring her small, peculiar gifts he found on his brief solo exploration. Of the surrounding forest, a perfectly formed quartz crystal, a bird's feather with an unusual iridescent sheen, simple offerings that spoke volumes. Lucy, driven by a fierce desire to prove her worth and, more pressingly, to pay her rapidly accumulating rent, became the de facto organizer of their small group. She spent hours poring over the mission request board, her brow furrowed in concentrity. On as she looked for the perfect first job for their new team. She would bring the most promising options to their table, explaining the details with an infectious enthusiasm. "Look at this one," she'd say, pointing to a flyer. "A giant Gorian terrorizing a village in the west. The reward is 70,000 jewel. We could totally handle that." Naruto would glance at the request, his senses extending for a moment to taste the intent behind the paper. "The mayor of that village is lying," he'd state flatly. "The reward is high because the Gorian is actually a breeding pair, and they have nested near the village's only water source. He is omitting details to lower the perceived risk." Lucy would stare at him, then at the flyer, then back at him. "How in the world could you possibly know that from a piece of paper?" "The ink smells of desperation and cheap paper," he'd reply, a statement that explained absolutely nothing to her, but was delivered with such unshakable certainty that she knew it was true. He was teaching them to see the world as he did, a tapestry of information waiting to be read by senses beyond the ordinary. It was on their 4th day as official members that Lucy found a request that piqued even Naruto's interest. It was written on a simple, elegant piece of parchment, the handwriting neat and precise. The reward was substantial, 200,000 jewel, but it was the nature of the job that was unusual. The port town of Shiverwind, Lucy read aloud, is afflicted by a strange, magical silence. All ambient sound is muffled, music cannot be played, and joyous sounds like laughter are erased. The phenomenon is spreading. The townsfolk are becoming lethargic and forgetful. We require mages to investigate the source of this affliction and restore our town to its natural state. Natsu, who had been attempting to eat fire from a torch on a nearby table, overheard and immediately lost interest. A silent town. Sounds boring. There's nothing to fight. But Naruto was intrigued. A magical effect on this scale, one that targeted a specific sensory input and had a secondary cognitive effect, was not the work of some mindless beast. It was complex. It was a puzzle. This one, he said, his voice cutting through the guild's noise. We will take this one. The journey north was a study in changing landscapes. The lush, green fields around Magnolia slowly gave way to hardier pine forests and rugged, windswept hills. The air grew colder, sharper, carrying the clean, crisp scent of impending winter. They took a carriage this time, a concession to Wendy and Lucy, though Naruto would have preferred to travel on foot. He spent the journey in his usual state of silent observation, while Wendy and Lucy watched the changing scenery with wide eyes. Shiverwind Port was unlike any place they had ever been. It was a town built to withstand the harsh northern elements, with sturdy stone buildings and steep, slate-gray roofs designed to shed heavy snow. A thick, pearlescent mist rolled in from the sea, clinging to the cobbled streets and muffling the world in a blanket of damp, cold silence. And the request had not been an exaggeration. The silence was not merely an absence of noise. It was a palpable presence. The normal sounds of a port town, the cry of gulls, the slap of waves against the docks, the shouts of sailors, were all eerily muted, as if heard from a great distance through a wall of cotton. The few people they saw on the streets moved with a slow, listless gait, their faces blank, their eyes clouded with a subtle confusion. They were bundled in thick wools and furs, but the chill that permeated the town felt deeper than the cold air. It was a coldness of the spirit. "This is creepy," Lucy whispered, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. She pulled her cloak tighter around herself. Wendy shivered, not from the cold, but from the feeling of the air itself. As a sky dragon slayer, she was uniquely sensitive to the atmosphere, and this air felt sick, stagnant, and heavy with a sorrow she couldn't name. "The wind isn't moving properly here," she murmured. "It feels trapped." Naruto's senses were on fire. He tasted the air and found it scrubbed clean of the normal energetic signatures of emotion. The joy, the anger, the ambition that he had sensed in the chaotic hum of Harjan was simply gone, replaced by a dull, gray void. It was like a color had been removed from the very fabric of reality. He closed his eyes, extending his awareness, trying to find a focal point, a source, but the effect was uniform, a perfect sphere of influence covering the entire town. It was unnervingly precise. They made their way to the address listed on the request, a small, solitary house on a cliff overlooking the misty sea. It was a neat, well-kept cottage with a small garden of hardy, salt-resistant flowers. As they approached the door, it opened before they could knock. The woman who stood in the doorway seemed to be a part of the town's melancholic atmosphere. She was beautiful, with a cascade of long, blue hair that mirrored the color of the sea behind her, and deep, sad blue eyes that seemed to hold all the world's rain within them. She was dressed in a simple, elegant blue dress and a thick, white woolen coat. A faint, almost imperceptible aura of rain and sorrow clung to her. Her magical power was immense, a deep and powerful ocean of energy. But it felt subdued, as if weighed down by an immense grief. "You are the mages from Fairy Tale," she said, her voice a soft, melodic whisper, like the sound of rain on a windowpane. "Juvia is grateful that you have come. You're the one who posted the request," Lucy asked, stepping forward. "I'm Lucy. This is Wendy, and this is Naruto." The woman, Juvia, inclined her head gracefully. Her gaze passed over Lucy and Wendy, but when it rested on Naruto, her sad eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She saw not just a boy, but a source of intense, vibrant life. He was the opposite of the crushing silence that afflicted her town. He was a bonfire in the middle of a frozen wasteland, a brilliant, blazing star in a sky that had forgotten the sun. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of something other than sorrow. It was a spark of warmth. A spark of hope. "Please, come inside," Juvia said, her voice a little less whispery than before. Her cottage was simple, clean, and filled with books. A small, magical fire crackled in the hearth, but it made no sound. They sat around a small wooden table, and Juvia explained the situation in her strange, poetic way. The silence came like the tide. She began, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that she did not drink. At first, it was a whisper at the edge of hearing, a gentle quiet that seemed almost peaceful. But then it grew. The gulls were the first to stop singing. Then, the musicians in the tavern found their instruments would produce no melody. Laughter became a hollow, empty thing, the sound stolen from the air the moment it left one's lips. She looked out the window at the gray, churning sea. Now the silence is drinking our memories. Not the important ones. Not yet. It starts with small things. The name of a favorite song. The taste of a childhood sweet. A lover's first smile. It is erasing the small joys that make up a life, leaving only the gray tapestry behind. Juvia was a water mage, she explained. Her magic was tied to the water, and to emotion. This town, her home, was a place she had chosen for its quiet, melancholic beauty. But this was not peace. This was a void, and it was affecting her magic, making it sluggish and heavy. Juvia has tried to find the source, she continued, her gaze returning to Naruto, as if drawing strength from his presence. My water can feel the flow of magic. But this is an absence. It is a drain, a hole in the world where the sound is supposed to be. Juvia believes it is a curse, an ancient one. Lucy, ever the scholar, immediately perked up. A curse. I have a book on auditory-based memory curses. Maybe I can find a reference. She rummaged through her pack and produced a thick, leather-bound tome, immediately becoming absorbed in its pages. Wendy, meanwhile, closed her eyes, focusing her own senses. Juvia-san is right, she said, her voice trembling slightly. The air is sick. It's like it's being suffocated. There's a central point, I think. A place where the air is the oldest, the most stagnant. It's in the center of town. Naruto had remained silent through the entire explanation, his crimson eyes never leaving Juvia's face. He had listened not just to her words, but to the flow of her energy, to the deep, resonant sadness that pulsed within her. He felt a strange kinship with it. His own life was born of a profound, cosmic loneliness. The solitary son of two beings who could not exist in the same space. He understood what it meant to be defined by a singular, overwhelming element. The bell tower, he said, his voice cutting through the quiet. Everyone turned to him. Juvia's eyes widened. The old Tide Caller's bell tower. It has been abandoned for a century. No one goes there. The effect is strongest there, Naruto explained. He stood up, his presence seeming to push back the oppressive silence within the small cottage. The energy is being drawn inward, toward that single point. Wendy is right. It is the heart of the sickness. He looked at the others, his gaze firm and confident. Lucy, find out what you can about breaking such a curse. Wendy, I may need your magic to cleanse the area. Juvia, you will guide us. Your knowledge of the town is invaluable. He assigned the roles with a natural, unforced authority. No one questioned him. Lucy nodded, her eyes already scanning her book with renewed vigor. Wendy stood up, her small face set with determination. And Juvia looked at him, and the faint spark of hope she had felt earlier grew into a steady, warming flame. In a town that had forgotten how to laugh, in a world that felt cold and gray, this boy was a promise of fire and light. She found herself wanting to stand in his warmth, to feel the sun again. Juvia will lead the way, she said. And for the first time since they had arrived, a faint, watery smile touched her lips. They made their way through the silent, misty streets to the town square. At its center stood the bell tower. It was a tall, slender structure of dark, sea-stained stone, its peak disappearing into the swirling mist. An aura of profound age and neglect hung about it. As they drew closer, the silence became absolute. Naruto could feel the air pressure changing, a subtle, physical weight pressing in on them. He placed a reassuring hand on Wendy's shoulder, who was looking pale. "Found it," Lucy suddenly exclaimed in a harsh whisper, her finger tracing a line in her book. Her eyes were wide. "It's called a phonophage relic. An artifact of a lost magical civilization. They don't consume sound out of malice. It's their food source. They're semi-sentient. This one, a lamenting bell, is a particularly nasty variant. It specifically feeds on sounds of joy and the memories associated with them. It grows stronger with every laugh it eats, every song it devours." "Can we destroy it?" Juvia asked, her hand instinctively glowing with the light blue energy of her water magic. Lucy shook her head, her expression grim. "That's the problem. The book says destroying the relic while it's saturated with stolen energy is catastrophic. It would release all the accumulated sound and memory in a single, explosive wave. The psychic backlash would be enough to shatter the minds of everyone in this town, driving them insane or leaving them as empty husks." A heavy silence, this one born of dawning horror rather than magic, fell over their group. They now understood the true nature of the trap they were in. They couldn't leave the bell, or it would eventually consume the entire town's collective soul. But they couldn't destroy it without annihilating the very people they were trying to save. They stood at the base of the ancient, silent tower, the mist swirling around their feet, faced with an enemy they couldn't punch. A curse they couldn't break with brute force. Naruto looked up at the tower, his crimson eyes glowing with a fierce, analytical light. The world saw an impossible problem. He saw a set of conditions. The bell fed on joy. It couldn't be destroyed while full. The solution, therefore, was not one of destruction, but of repletion. Of balance. He looked at the three powerful mages beside him. The celestial wizard with her keys to other worlds. The sky maiden who could breathe life into the very air. The rain woman whose power was the ocean of emotion itself. He saw not just their magic, but their purpose, their hearts. And a plan began to form in his mind, a strategy as audacious and unconventional as he was. "We are not going to destroy it," Naruto announced, his voice a low, confident rumble that seemed to push back against the encroaching void. "We are going to feed it until it bursts." Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Symphony of Starlight and Rain. Naruto's declaration hung in the supernaturally silent air, a concept so counterintuitive it bordered on madness. Lucy stared at him, her mind, which had just triumphantly solved the riddle of their adversary's nature, now struggling to comprehend his proposed solution. "Feed it," she repeated, her voice a strained whisper. "Naruto, the book said it feeds on joy to grow stronger. Giving it what it wants sounds like the worst possible idea. A starving predator is cautious," Naruto explained, his crimson eyes fixed on the misty peak of the bell tower. His voice was calm, pedagogical, like a moss-chair craftsman explaining the properties of his materials. "It consumes what it can, when it can, sustaining itself. But a glutton, presented with a feast beyond its wildest dreams, will gorge itself without thought. It will consume until its own nature becomes its undoing." He turned his gaze to her, and the sheer, unshakable confidence in his eyes was a physical force. "We are not going to give it a snack. We are going to prepare a banquet so rich, so powerful, and so multi-layered that its simple, parasitic nature will be unable to process it. We will force it to choke on the very thing it craves." Juvia looked from the tower to Naruto, her sad blue eyes filled with a dawning understanding. His logic was that of a force of nature. A flood does not triumph by retreating from the river, it overwhelms its banks. A fire does not win by starving itself of fuel, it consumes until there is nothing left to burn. In his violent, elemental reasoning, she found a strange and compelling beauty. He didn't see a curse to be broken. He saw a system to be overloaded. "Juvia understands," she breathed, the words tasting strange and new. "You wish to drown the silence in a flood of song." Precisely. Naruto's plan, now that it had a conceptual framework, began to take on a practical, strategic shape. "Lucy, you said the relic is semi-sentient. This implies a simple, direct intelligence. It knows what it likes, joy, music, happy memories. It will not recognize a threat if it is disguised as its preferred meal. He turned to Wendy. Your magic purifies and vitalizes the air. The atmosphere in that tower is stagnant, dead. It acts as a buffer, draining power. Before we can begin the feast, you must first set the table. You will create a space for us to work, a sanctuary of clean, living air. Wendy nodded, her small face serious. She understood her role perfectly. She was to be the foundation, the stage upon which this strange opera would be performed. Lucy, Naruto continued, his attention shifting. Your celestial spirits are beings of pure magical energy, from a realm of order. They are the perfect source for the main course. You will summon the one whose art is sound. Lyra, Lucy asked, her hand instinctively going to the silver key on her belt. Her music is beautiful, but it's gentle. I don't know if it will be enough. It will not be, on its own, Naruto confirmed, anticipating her doubt. Which brings us to Juvia. He looked at the rain woman, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. Your magic is emotion made manifest. You feel the sorrow of the sky, the loneliness of the rain. But that means you also understand its opposite. You will be our amplifier. You will take the pure, simple sound from Lyra's song and infuse it with the raw, concentrated concept of joy. You will not be making rain. You will be making a storm of pure, positive emotion. Juvia's breath hitched. He was asking her to do more than just use her magic. He was asking her to channel an emotion that had become a stranger to her, to wield happiness as a weapon while standing in the heart of a void that consumed it. It was a terrifying, yet exhilarating, challenge. It was a vote of confidence in her emotional strength. Something no one had ever shown her before. She looked at him, at his unwavering belief in her, and felt a resolve hardening in her heart like ice. Juvia will not fail you. And what about you, Naruto? Lucy asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and thrill. What's your part in this symphony of insanity? A faint, almost invisible smile touched the corner of Naruto's lips. Every feast needs a final, unexpected ingredient. The one that elevates it from a simple meal to something divine. He looked back up at the tower. I will provide the spice. There was no more discussion. The plan was set. With a shared, determined nod, they began their approach. Pushing open the heavy, iron-bound oak doors of the bell tower was like opening an ancient tomb. A wave of cold, dead air washed over them, carrying the scent of century-old dust and a profound, metaphysical emptiness. The oppressive silence of the town was a mere echo compared to the absolute void within these walls. Every footstep on the stone floor was swallowed, every rustle of clothing was negated. They moved in a bubble of profound quiet, their only communication the shared determination in their eyes. A spiral staircase, carved from the same dark stone as the walls, wound its way up into the darkness. Naruto led the way, his presence a small, defiant flicker of warmth against the encroaching cold. He could feel the relic's influence as a psychic pressure, a constant, subtle drain on his life force, a low-level hum of hunger that vibrated not in his ears, but in the very marrow of his bones. He shielded Wendy, who was most susceptible to the atmospheric sickness, with a faint, invisible layer of his own aura, allowing her to ascend without being overwhelmed. The climb was long and unnerving. The air grew thicker, heavier, with each upward spiral. Dust motes, ancient and undisturbed, hung perfectly still in the narrow shafts of gray light that pierced the gloom from arrow-slit windows. It felt as if time itself had slowed to a crawl, trapped in the amber of the tower's silence. Finally, they emerged into the belfry. The chamber was a large, circular room, open to the elements through four massive, unglazed archways. The mist from the town swirled in, bringing a damp chill but no sound. And in the center of the chamber, hanging from a massive, blackened timber beam, was the source of the curse. It was not a bell of brass or iron. It was carved from a single piece of what looked like polished, obsidian-like crystal, shot through with veins of a dull, pulsating purple. Its surface was covered in a complex lacework of alien runes that seemed to writhe and shift if you looked at them directly. It did not swing. It hung with an unnerving stillness, and the air around it shimmered, warped by the sheer force of its sound-devouring hunger. It was beautiful, ancient, and utterly malevolent. Okay, Lucy breathed, her voice stolen by the bell before it could fully form. This is a lot more intimidating up close. Naruto ignored the relic's oppressive aura. He scanned the room, his strategic mind finalizing the details of their performance. Wendy. Now. In the center, beneath the bell. Wendy stepped forward, her small form looking incredibly fragile in the face of the monstrous artifact. But her eyes were closed, her face a mask of concentration. She took a deep, steadying breath. Gathering her magic, a soft, brilliant teal aura enveloped her. Sky Dragon's sanctuary. She released her breath not as a roar, but as a gentle, swirling exhalation of pure, vitalized air. The teal energy expanded from her, forming a perfect, translucent dome that filled the center of the belfry, pushing back the stagnant, gray atmosphere. Inside the dome, the air suddenly felt clean, fresh, and alive. The oppressive psychic pressure lessened, the absolute silence replaced by a gentle, expectant stillness. She had created their stage. Lucy. Begin the performance, Naruto commanded. Lucy took her place inside the dome. She held up her silver key, her heart pounding. Open. Gate of the Lyre. Lyra. A soft chime, the first true sound in this chamber for 100 years. Echoed as the spirit appeared in a shower of golden light. Lyra was a beautiful, orange-haired girl in a pink dress, carrying her signature harp. She looked around, her large eyes wide-wit. Fear at the oppressive bell hanging above them. Lucy. This place is scary. She whimpered. It feels like my music wants to die here. I know, Lyra, but we need you, Lucy said, her voice filled with a desperate encouragement. Sing. Sing the happiest song you know. Sing for everyone in this town. Lyra, bolstered by her master's plea, took a deep breath. She strummed a chord on her harp. The sound was thin, fragile, and the moment it left the sanctuary of Wendy's dome, it was devoured by the bell, which pulsed with a faint, greedy purple light. Undeterred, Lyra began to sing. Her voice was angelic, a melody of pure, simple joy. A song of sunny days and childhood laughter. But it was a candle in a hurricane, a tiny point of light being consumed by an overwhelming darkness. Juvia. Now. Naruto's voice was a low growl of command. Juvia stepped forward, positioning herself between Lyra and the bell. She raised her hands, and the very moisture in the misty air answered her call. Water coalesced around her, not as a weapon, but as a lens. Water nebula. She created a perfect, shimmering sphere of crystal-clear water that floated in the air, completely enveloping Lyra and her song. The music now traveled through the water, and Juvia closed her eyes, pouring her own immense magical energy into the sphere. She pushed aside her own innate sorrow, the grief that had been her constant companion for so long. She reached deeper, for the memories the silence had tried to steal from her own mind. The taste of a warm sweet bun on a cold day, the feeling of a rare ray of sunshine on her face. The kindness in the eyes of a new friend who saw her not as a monster, but as a pillar of strength. She found the core concept of joy, and with a silent, determined scream of her soul, she poured it into the water. The effect was instantaneous. The water of the nebula began to glow with a soft, cyan light. Lyra's song, passing through it, was transformed. It was no longer a gentle melody, it was a tidal wave of pure, weaponized euphoria. The notes became visible, streaks of golden light swimming through the glowing blue water. The amplified song crashed against the inner surface of Wendy's dome, a symphony of light and sound that was almost overwhelming. The lamenting bell reacted with ravenous hunger. The purple veins within it began to throb violently, its entire form glowing with a sickly, oversaturated light. It drank the amplified joy with a desperation that was palpable, the runes on its surface flaring with energy. It was working. The glutton was taking the bait. But it wasn't enough. The bell was powerful, ancient. It was consuming the song, but it was stabilizing, adjusting to the new, richer diet. It would not be enough to make it burst. My turn, Naruto said. He stepped into the heart of the performance, right beside Juvia's water nebula. He did not prepare a roar or clench his fists. He raised a single, open hand, palm facing the bell. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, he deliberately suppressed the dragon within him. He silenced the raging inferno of Igneel's legacy and reached for the other half of his soul. He reached for the stars. The air around him went cold. A profound, absolute silence, different from the bell's hunger, descended upon him. It was the silence of deep space, of the void between constellations. A brilliant, golden aura, shot through with the pure white of distant galaxies, erupted around him. It was not the chaotic, passionate energy of fire, it was the calm, inexorable, mathematical power of the celestial spirit king. He gathered starlight not from the sky, but from the very fabric of reality itself. He pulled on the cosmic background radiation, on the faint, ancient light of creation. A miniature star, a point of impossibly dense, perfectly contained light, formed in his palm. It did not radiate heat, it radiated pure, conceptual order. The joy of a child's song is pure, he said, his voice echoing with a strange, dual resonance. As if he were speaking from a great distance. The joy of a loving heart is powerful. He looked at Juvia, then at Lucy and Wendy. But there are older joys. Deeper joys. He gently pushed the miniature star forward. It drifted into Juvia's water nebula. It did not sizzle or steam. It dissolved, merging with the water and the song. And it added its own music to the symphony, the silent, perfect harmony of celestial bodies in their orbits, the brilliant, explosive joy of a supernova giving birth to new worlds, the slow, deep, satisfying hum of a galaxy turning. He infused the song not just with emotion, but with the fundamental, creative joy of existence itself. And then, he added the final spice. He allowed a single, controlled ember of his draconic fire to bleed into the mix. Not the destructive rage, but the passionate, life-affirming warmth. The warmth of a protective father, the heat of a dragon's heart. Fire and starlight, chaos and order, passion and law, the resulting energy, channeled through Juvia's water and given voice by Lyra's song, was a force that the universe had never before witnessed. It was a symphony of impossible contradictions, a meal so complex, so potent, so utterly outside the realm of the bell's simple understanding that the relic's parasitic consciousness shattered. The purple glow of the bell turned a blinding, pure white. The alien runes on its surface cracked. The entire tower groaned, not in protest, but in release. The bell did not explode. It did not shatter. It chimed. It was a single, perfect note, a sound of such profound, crystalline beauty that it seemed to contain all the songs ever sung. The note expanded from the tower, not as a destructive shockwave, but as a gentle, golden wave of pure, healing sound. The wave washed over Shiverwind Port. It flowed down the cobbled streets, into the silent houses, across the quiet docks. And it carried with it everything the bell had stolen. A baker, kneading dough with listless hands, suddenly stopped. The memory of his wife's laugh, clear as a bell, echoed in his mind, and a smile touched his lips for the first time in a month. A little girl, sitting blankly by a window, gasped as she remembered the tune her mother used to hum to her, and she began to hum it herself. On the docks, two old sailors who had been staring blankly at the sea suddenly looked at each other and broke into a hearty, booming laugh, the sound of which was no longer stolen from the air. The mist over the town seemed to thin, and a single, determined ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the spire of the bell tower. In the belfry, the team collapsed, drained but triumphant. Wendy's sanctuary dissolved. Lyra, her song finished, faded away in a shower of light, leaving behind a grateful smile. Lucy slumped to the floor, her magical energy almost completely spent. Juvia stood swaying, emotionally and magically exhausted, but her face was a picture of pure, unadulterated wonder. She looked at the bell. The obsidian-like crystal was now clear as glass, the purple veins and alien runes gone, wiped clean. It hung silently, no longer a relic of hunger, but simply a bell. She turned her gaze to Naruto. He stood calmly, the cosmic light around him fading, his normal, intense warmth returning. He had done it. He had not just defeated a curse, he had transformed it. He had used her power, her sorrow, her very essence, and turned it into a catalyst for a miracle. The rain within her soul seemed to part, and a brilliant, dazzling sun emerged. She walked towards him on unsteady legs. Before she could think, before her inherent shyness could stop her, she did something she had never done before. She reached out and gently took his hand. Her skin was cool, like rain, while his was a steady, comforting warmth. Naruto-sama, she whispered, the honorific slipping out naturally, a sign of a respect so profound it bordered on reverence. Juvia has always brought the rain, the sadness, but you You showed her how to create a rainbow. Naruto looked down at their joined hands, then into her wide, shining blue eyes. He saw the shift in her, the lifting of a burden she had carried her entire life. He gave her hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze. Your reign was never the problem, Juvia, he said, his voice quiet, yet resonant with an undeniable truth. The problem was that you had forgotten it also helps the flowers grow. And in the distance, from the town below, another sound reached them, carried on a fresh, clean breeze. It was the sound of a musician, his inspiration returned, playing a joyful, triumphant tune on his fiddle. The sound of life, restored. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Gilded Cage and the Will of the Saint. The return to the fairy tale guild hall was a triumphant cacophony. The moment they stepped through the doors, bearing news of their success in Shiverwind, they were swept up in a wave of boisterous congratulations. Kana offered Juvia, who had decided to accompany them back to Magnolia to officially apply for guild membership, a welcoming barrel of ale. Gray, hearing of a curse centered around a giant bell, immediately challenged Natsu to a fight to see who could shout louder, an idiotic contest that ended abruptly when Urza froze them both with a single, glacial stare. Lucy found herself regaling a Captiva, Ted Mirajan and a curious Levi Magarden with the tale, her storytelling skills embellishing the events into a grand epic of sound and fury. Wendy was proudly showing off a new enchanting technique she developed to Mikao and Wakaba. For a few blissful hours, the four of them were simply members of the guild, heroes of a successful mission, their shared victory a warm, glowing ember in the boisterous hearth of their new home. Naruto, as was his custom, had retreated to his corner table, a silent observer of the chaos he had helped create. He watched Juvia, who was tentatively accepting a mug from Kana, a small, shy smile gracing her lips as she was welcomed into the fold. He saw the genuine, uncomplicated joy on Wendy's face as she was praised for her role. He noted the pride in Lucy's voice as she recounted their adventure. This was the result of their efforts. Not just a restored town, but the strengthening of the bonds within this strange, chaotic family. It was a result he found deeply, fundamentally satisfying. The warm bubble of celebration burst when a single, impeccably dressed Rune Knight stepped into the guild hall. He moved with a stiff, military precision that was jarringly out of place amidst the relaxed pandemonium. He held a formal scroll, sealed with the unmistakable crest of the Magic Council. The guild fell into a wary silence, the atmosphere shifting from laboratory to tense in a single heartbeat. The Rune Knight's eyes scanned the room, his gaze passing over the various powerful mages until it landed, with unnerving accuracy, on Naruto. He marched directly to his table, the clank of his polished sabatons echoing in the sudden quiet. Naruto of Fairy Tale, the knight announced, his voice devoid of any emotion. By order of the Magic Council, you are hereby summoned to an inquest at our headquarters in Era. Your presence is required within 24 hours. He placed the scroll on the table. It was not a request. It was an imperial command. An angry murmur rippled through the guild. Natsu, already thawed out, was on his feet in an instant, flames licking at his fists. The stuffy old council wants a piece of our new guy. They'll have to go through me first. Urza placed a restraining hand on his shoulder, her own face a mask of grim concern. A summons to an inquest was a serious matter. It was the council's method of investigating a potential threat to the stability of the continent, a prelude to a trial or the branding of a mage as a heretic. Makarov Dreyar appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression uncharacteristically serious. That will be all, knight, he said, his small voice carrying an immense weight of authority. My son will, of course, comply with the council's invitation. Inform them that I shall be accompanying him, as will his official guild escort, Urza Scarlet. The Rune Knight bowed stiffly and departed as mechanically as he had arrived. The moment the doors closed, the guild erupted in worried chatter. Master, you can't be serious. Mikao protested. The council is a snake pit. They'll try to dissect him. They are afraid, Makarov said, his gaze fixed on Naruto, who had not moved or shown an reaction throughout the entire exchange. A power capable of vaporizing a harbor and dismantling an ancient curse in a matter of days has appeared from nowhere. Their fear is logical, but it is also dangerous. He looked at Urza, Prepare for the journey to Crocus. We leave at once. The journey to the capital city was a stark contrast to their previous travels. The mood was somber, the air thick with unspoken tension. Makarov sat with his eyes closed, seemingly dozing, but Naruto could feel the immense magical power churning beneath his calm exterior, a sleeping volcano preparing for a potential eruption. Urza sat ramrod straight, her jaw set, her mind clearly racing through potential scenarios and legal precedents. She was no longer just a guildmate, she was a knight preparing to defend her charge in the highest court in the land. Naruto, for his part, remained impassive, his gaze directed out the window as the pastoral countryside gave way to the grand, soaring architecture of Crocus, the flower-blooming capital. He felt their concern, a protective warmth that was still a novel sensation to him, but he did not feel their tension. The Magic Council was a variable, a political entity with its own set of rules and motivations. He would learn them, analyze them, and act accordingly. Fear was an inefficient and illogical response. The central headquarters of the Magic Council, was not located within the public splendor of Crocus. It was a separate, magically shielded edifice, a fortress of white marble and gleaming crystal that seemed to pierce the very heavens. Its design was one of stark, intimidating geometry, a declaration of absolute order and unassailable power. The air here was different. It was cold, sterile, and hummed with the energy of countless ancient, powerful enchantments. Naruto could taste the layers of security wards, scrying spells, and containment fields woven into the very stones of the building. It was a gilded cage, designed to house and control the most powerful forces in the world. They were met not by a simple knight, but by a contingent of the council's elite guard, their armor inscribed with glowing, defensive runes. They were led through vast, echoing halls, their footsteps the only sound in the cavernous spaces. The walls were lined with portraits of past council members, their stern, judgmental eyes seeming to follow their every move. The sheer scale and oppressive silence of the place was designed to intimidate, to remind any who entered of their own insignificance in the face of the law. It had no effect on Naruto. He walked with the same calm, steady gait he used in the forest, his senses absorbing the details of his new environment with a detached, analytical curiosity. They were led to a massive, circular chamber at the heart of the fortress. The room was a grand amphitheater, with 9 ornate, throne-like chairs arranged on a high dais. In the center of the chamber's floor was a single, simple stone chair, positioned to make its occupant feel isolated and judged. This was the inquest chamber. 5 of the 9 seats were occupied. Naruto recognized one from the descriptions in a book Lucy had been reading. A tall, stern-looking old man with a long beard. Another, a young man with blue hair and a strange facial tattoo, watched their entrance with a detached, almost bored expression. Naruto's eyes lingered on him for a moment. This man's energy signature was strange, a complex and dissonant chord that hinted at a deep, hidden secret. The central seat was occupied by a man who was clearly in charge. He was not old, but his hair was a stark, severe white. His face was sharp, intelligent, and etched with the lines of someone who had spent a lifetime making difficult, weighty decisions. This was Counselor Valerius, a master of law archiving magic, a man whose very soul was intertwined with the rules and regulations that governed Fury. Master Makarov, Urza Scarlet, Valerius greeted them. His voice is cold and precise as polished marble. It is a testament to the gravity of this situation that you have both chosen to attend. His gaze then shifted, falling upon Naruto like the blade of a guillotine. And this must be the anomaly. He did not say, boy, or mage. He said, anomaly, a variable that did not fit his ordered worldview. My son has a name, Valerius, Makarov said, his folksy tone a deliberate counterpoint to the counselor's icy formality. It is Naruto, and he is a proud mage of fairy tale. Is he? Valerius retorted, leaning forward slightly. Our archives, W.H. It contained the magical signature and lineage of every registered mage in this continent for the last 300 years, have no record of him. No birth, no family, no magical education. He simply appeared, and within weeks of his appearance, a slaver ring in Harjan is annihilated with a level of force not seen since the last Etherian firing, and a century-old curse in Shiverwind is dismantled. Using a form of magic our finest scholars cannot even identify. You will forgive us for our curiosity. Urza stepped forward, her hand resting on the pommel of her sword. Counselor, I was present in Harjan. Naruto acted to save the lives of a dozen innocent women, including my guildmate Lucy Heartfilia. He neutralized a threat with precision and control. His actions were heroic. Heroism is not in question here, Miss Scarlet. Another counselor, a severe-looking woman, interjected. Unregulated power is power without precedent, without oversight, is the very definition of a threat. It is a wildfire waiting for a wind. The blue-haired young man, Seagrain, stifled a yawn. Oh, let's get on with it. Ask your questions, Valerius. I have a prior engagement. Valerius shot Seagrain a look of annoyance before focusing back on Naruto, who had remained silent, watching, listening. Very well, Naruto. Tell us where you came from. Tell us the source of your power. A power that feels of both the dragon and the star. A contradiction that should not exist. Naruto met the counselor's gaze without flinching. His own crimson eyes were like embers, holding a heat that the sterile, cold room could not diminish. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, but it filled the vast chamber, calm, clear, and resonant with an ancient authority that made the counselors sit up straighter in their thrones. I come from a place of fire and of law, he began. My father was a king of dragons. My other father was a king of stars. I was taught to burn with the will of the world's heart, and to shish in with the unbending order of the cosmos. A stunned silence followed his words. The counselors exchanged looks of disbelief and derision. King of dragons, king of stars, Valerius scoffed. Do you take us for fools? Are you claiming to be some sort of demigod from a children's fairy tale? I am stating a fact, Naruto replied, his tone unchanging. Your belief, or lack thereof, does not alter its truth. You are afraid because you cannot place me within your archives. You see a variable you cannot quantify, and your system interprets that as a threat. He took a step forward, leaving the designated accused chair and moving to the center of the floor, a subtle but powerful act of defiance. He was no longer the one being judged, he was a participant in a dialogue. Your fear is based on a flawed premise, he continued, his gaze sweeping across all five of them. You believe that power must be regulated to be safe. But the greatest powers in this universe, the turning of the stars, the fire in the planet's core, the tides of the ocean, are not regulated by committees or laws. They are governed by balance. By their own intrinsic nature. Arrogance. Valerius snapped, rising from his seat. You compare yourself to a star. To the tides. You are one man. A single, impossibly powerful man whose whims could shatter a nation. We are the shield that protects Fury from men like you. And what will protect Fury from the threats that your archives have no name for? Naruto countered, his voice rising in intensity for the first time, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the stone floor. A shadow is coming, a dragon of pure apocalypse whose power dwarfs my own. A darkness that consumes magic and unravels worlds. Your rules, your laws, your precious archives, they will be less than dust in the face of Acknowledge. The name fell into the room like a black stone, and the very temperature seemed to drop. Makarov's eyes snapped open. Seagrain, for the first time, looked fully alert. A flicker of something dark and calculating in his eyes. The other counselors recoiled as if struck. The name was a dark myth, a whispered horror story, not a thing to be spoken of in the hallowed halls of the law. You speak of fairy tales and bogeymen to distract from the issue at hand. Valerius accused, though a faint tremor had entered his voice. Do I? Naruto held up a hand. A single, perfect, impossibly hot flame. The color of a dying sun, ignited in his palm. The ancient security wards of the chamber flared to life, shimmering walls of blue energy trying to contain it, they sizzled and buckled against its raw, primal power. The Fire Dragon King, Igneel, prepared me for this war. He gave me his fire to be a weapon against the shadow. Then, the flame extinguished, and was replaced by a swirling vortex of pure starlight, a miniature galaxy of silent, cold, beautiful light. The Celestial Spirit King gave me his power to be a shield. To uphold the laws of existence when all other laws have failed. I am not a threat to Fury. I am, perhaps, its only hope against a future you refuse to see. He let the starlight fade, leaving his hand empty. He stood in the center of the chamber, cloaked in a silence more powerful than any shout. He had not pleaded his case. He had presented his reality. The counselors were speechless. They were men and women of law and logic, and they had just been confronted by a being who spoke of cosmic truths and demonstrated power that defied their every known principle of magic. It was Makarov who broke the silence, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. "You see, Valerius," he said, his voice filled with a grandfatherly pride. "My children in fairy tale are a loud, destructive, and chaotic bunch. But they are this way because they live with their whole hearts. They love with their whole hearts. And they fight with their whole hearts. Naruto is no different. He is simply more. You cannot regulate a force of nature. But you can, perhaps, learn to trust it." A long, tense moment passed. Valerius stared at Naruto, a war of ideologies raging in his eyes. His entire life was built upon the principle of order, of control. And here stood a being who was the living embodiment of a power beyond any control he could imagine. Finally, he slumped back into his throne, a look of profound weariness on his face. "This inquest is over," he declared, his voice heavy. "You are free to go, Naruto of fairy tale." He paused, his eyes locking with Naruto's one last time. "But know this, you are no longer an anomaly. You are a recognized variable. And every variable in my equation will be watched." As they walked out of the silent, sterile fortress and back into the living, breathing air of Crocus, Urza let out a brea. She hadn't realized she'd been holding. She looked at Naruto, who seemed as unaffected by the inquest as if he had just been discussing the weather. "I have never," she said, her voice filled with a profound awe that bordered on reverence, "seen anyone speak to the council like that. Not even Master Makarov. You did not bow. You did not even acknowledge their authority. Their authority is built on the laws of this country." Naruto replied, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, toward Magnolia. "My authority comes from the laws of creation. They are not the same." They boarded the train back home, the setting sun casting long, golden rays across the landscape. They sat in silence for a long time, the rhythmic clatter of the tracks a comforting, steady presence. Urza found herself studying him. The way the light caught the crimson of his eyes, the absolute, unshakable calm that radiated from him. He was a paradox, a being of unimaginable power who sought not conquest, but a home. A king who seemed content to sit at a corner table in a rowdy guild hall. "You said you were a shield," she said softly, breaking the silence. Naruto turned his gaze from the window to her. "I am. Fairy tale is a shield, too," she said, a small, fierce smile on her lips. "We protect our own. We protect our family." She met his eyes, and in that moment, the wall of professional respect between them dissolved, replaced by something warmer, something more personal. "You are a part of that family now, Naruto. You are one of the people we will shield. And I know you will do the same for us." It was not a question. It was a declaration of faith. A knight, who had dedicated her life to the rules and the sword, was placing her trust not in an institution, but in the heart of the anomaly sitting before her. Naruto held her gaze, and for the second time in his life, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. It was a smile that promised loyalty, strength, and a shared future. "I will," he said. Indeed, it was a vow as binding as any celestial law, as eternal as a dragon's flame. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Midas Vault and the Weight of Gold. The aftermath of the inquest settled over Fairy Tail not as a pall of fear, but as a mantle of defiant pride. Naruto was no longer just a new, overwhelmingly powerful member. He was their overwhelmingly powerful member, the one who had faced down the IC Council in their own fortress and had not bent a knee. The story, embellished with each telling by a gleeful Natsu and a proud Urza, became another thread in the guild's growing tapestry of legends. Naruto himself, of course, contributed nothing to the myth-making, his stoic presence at his corner table a constant, humbling reality check to the increasingly wild tales of his cosmic parentage. Yuvia was officially accepted into the guild, her sky-blue mark placed proudly on her left thigh. She gravitated naturally to Naruto's corner, her presence a quiet, calming pool of water that contrasted with the usual fiery chaos of the hall. A subtle, Unspoken dynamic began to form. Lucy, ever inquisitive and sociable, would bring missions and stories to the table. Urza would often join them for a rare moment of quiet contemplation, sharing a piece of strawberry cake in a companionable silence that spoke volumes. Wendy, secure in her role as his little sister, would practice her magic nearby. A small, powerful constellation was forming in their corner of the guild's universe, with Naruto as its quiet, steady center. This new, comfortable equilibrium was disrupted exactly 1 week after their return from Era. The same immaculate rune knight from before entered the guild hall, though this time he carried not a summons, but a high-level mission request, delivered directly from Counselor Valerius's office. It was an S-class equivalent mission, designated as a matter of national security, and it was offered exclusively to Fairy Tail, specifically, to the team led by Naruto. Makarov read the request aloud to the assembled guild, his voice grim. The Midas Vault, an abandoned magical research and containment facility in the northern mountains of Balam, has gone silent. It housed a team of the council's top alchemists who were studying unstable transmutation magic. All communications ceased 3 days ago. The last message was a single, panicked word: gold. Makarov looked up from the parchment, his eyes grave. The council is requesting that Naruto's team investigate the facility, ascertain the fate of the researchers, and neutralize any and all threats. The reward is 2 million jewel. A wave of murmurs went through the hall. Balam was a dangerous, untamed continent. An S-class mission from the council was unheard of. It wasn't a request. It was a test. A challenge. Valerius was throwing down the gauntlet, sending Naruto into a situation that the council's own elite forces were unwilling or unable to handle. He wanted to see the anomaly perform. He wanted to measure him. Natsu was instantly on his feet, fire in his eyes. All right, a real fight. I'm going. No. A calm, firm voice cut through the noise. All eyes turned to Naruto. He had risen from his table, ND taken the request form from Makarov's hand, his crimson eyes scanning the text. He absorbed the details, his mind already processing the strategic variables: remote location, unknown alchemical threat, containment facility. Brute force would be a liability here. This is not a mission for a brawl, Naruto stated, his gaze sweeping over the guild. He looked at Natsu's eager, fiery energy, at Gray's cool, reactive power. They were powerful, but this mission required a different kind of strength. He turned his gaze to his own table. I will require a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. His decision was instantaneous. The logic behind it as swift and precise as a lightning strike. Urza, your strategic mind and versatile armory will be our shield. Lucy, your intellect and the unique abilities of your spirits will be our key. Juvia, your powers of detection and control over a fluid element will be our guide in an unknown environment. He had chosen his team. The 3 women stood, their extras. Scions a mixture of pride and grim determination. He had not chosen them because they were his friends. He had chosen them because they were the right tools for the job. And in that cold, tactical assessment, they each found a profound and deeply personal validation of their own strength. He then walked over to Wendy, who was looking up at him with wide, expectant eyes. He knelt down, placing a gentle hand on her head. Your role is the most important, he said softly, his voice for her ears alone. You will stay here. You will be my anchor. Protect this family while I am gone. Can you do that for me? Wendy's initial flicker of disappointment was instantly replaced by a surge of pride. He wasn't leaving her behind. He was giving her a mission. He was trusting her to guard their home. She nodded, her small face a mask of fierce resolve. I will, Naruto ni-san. The journey to the foot of the Balam Mountains was arduous, culminating in a long trek through a harsh, windswept wilderness where the very rocks seemed hostile. The entrance to the Midas Vault was not a grand gate, but a single, massive circular door of dark, unblemished iron, set into the face of a sheer cliff. It was sealed with a complex magical lock that glowed with a faint, sickly yellow light. There were no handles, no hinges, no visible way to open it. Lucy stepped forward, summoning her spectacles, and began to analyze the runes. This is ancient alchemical script. It's a paradox lock. It says, only that which has no value may enter. What is that supposed to mean? Urza summoned a massive battle axe from her personal pocket dimension. Perhaps it means it requires a demonstration of overwhelming force. She swung the axe, a powerful arc of silver that crashed against the iron door with a deafening clang. The axe blade, one of her strongest, shattered into 1,000 pieces, while the door remained utterly unscratched. The yellow runes merely pulsed, brighter for a moment, as if they had fed on the kinetic energy of her failed attack. Juvia tried a different approach, sending a high-pressure jet of water at the seams, attempting to force it open, but the water simply flowed off its surface as if it were oiled. They were stumped. Naruto, who had been watching their efforts in silence, stepped forward. He looked not at the runes, but at the door itself. He understood the riddle instantly. Its logic was elemental, not semantic. Value, force, these things were being absorbed. So, the answer was to offer it nothing. He placed his open palm flat against the cold iron. He did not channel fire. He did not channel starlight. He did not push. He did nothing. He simply stood there, his mind a perfect, calm void. He made himself a space of absolute zero, a point of utter non-intent in the universe. He was not trying to open the door. He was simply there. For a long, silent moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low, resonant groan that seemed to come from the heart of the mountain, the gray T-iron door began to retract into the cliff face. The paradox lock, offered the absolute null value of his non-action, had opened. Lucy and Juvia stared, their minds reeling at the lateral, almost philosophical, solution. Urza looked at him with a new level of respect. He had defeated the lock not with power, but with a form of control so absolute it bordered on Zen mastery. The air that wafted OUT from the newly opened passage was cold, sterile, and carried the sharp, metallic scent of ozone and something else, something that smelled like greed. They ignited magical lights, Lucy a soft golden glow from her hand, Juvia a floating orb of luminescent water, and stepped inside. The interior was a series of long, geometric corridors carved from smooth, black basalt. Glowing yellow conduits, carrying the facility's power, ran along the ceiling like veins. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic dripping of condensation. There was no sign of a struggle, no bodies, no blood. It was unnervingly clean. The first encounter happened in a large, circular chamber, a nexus of several corridors. As they entered, the corridor behind them sealed shut with a heavy stone slab. Simultaneously, 3 humanoid figures emerged from alcoves in the walls. They were Aurum sentinels. They were 7 feet tall, made of a polished, swirling golden material, and had no faces, only a single glowing yellow optic in the center of their heads. They moved with a silent, fluid grace, their footsteps making no sound on the stone floor. Hostile magical signatures detected, a synthesized monotone voice echoed through the chamber, seemingly coming from the sentinels themselves. Commencing sterilization protocol. Urza was the first to react. Requip. Heaven's wheel armor. In a flash of light, she was clad in her winged silver armor, dozens of swords hovering in the air around her. Blumenblatt. The swords flew, a swirling vortex of steel aimed at the lead sentinel. But something strange happened. The moment the tips of the swords came within an inch of the sentinel's golden body, they stopped, their momentum completely arrested. A golden sheen spread from the tips of the blades, rapidly encasing them. In a matter of seconds, Urza's enchanted swords were transformed into inert, golden statues, which then clattered uselessly to the floor. It transmutes anything that comes into contact with it, Urza shouted, her eyes wide with shock as she backed away. Physical attacks are useless. Juvia launched her own attack. Water Slicer. A blade of high-pressure water shot towards another sentinel. But like the swords, the water itself was transmuted mid-flight, turning into a shower of solid gold dust that rained down harmlessly. It's an instant, contact-based transmutation field. Lucy cried out, her mind racing. It doesn't matter if it's solid or liquid. It turns everything to gold. The sentinels began to advance, their single eyes glowing ominously. They didn't run. They walked with a calm, inexorable pace, their golden hands outstretched. The threat was absolute. A single touch meant a horrible, permanent death. They were trapped. Their strongest attacks were not only useless, but were being consumed. Panic began to prick at the edges of their discipline. Stop attacking. Naruto's voice cut through the tension, as calm and steady as a rock in a storm. He hadn't moved, his crimson eyes scanning the sentinels, not as monsters, but as machines. He saw the glowing optic, the faint energy lines running just beneath their golden shells, the way they moved in perfect, synchronized patterns. They are not alive, he explained, his voice a lesson in the midst of a battle. They are automated constructs. Their transmutation field is their primary function. It is always active, but it requires an immense amount of focused energy. Look at their cores. He pointed, and they saw it. In the center of each sentinel's chest was a fist-sized, glowing yellow crystal. The same color as the conduits on the ceiling. It was their power source. The transmutation field is projected from their entire body, but the power is localized, he deduced. We do not attack the body. We attack the power source. He looked at Lucy. Your spirits. Do you have one that is fast and small? Lucy's eyes lit up with understanding. Yes. Open. Gate of the clock. Horologium. A tall, grandfather clock with arms and a face appeared around her, protecting her. From within the clock, her voice commanded, now, summon Pixis. A small, compass-like spirit with wings appeared. Guide Horologium's pendulum to strike the central crystal of the sentinel on the right, Naruto instructed. Got it. Lucy relayed the command. Horologium's massive pendulum swung with incredible speed and precision, bypassing the sentinel's outstretched hands and striking the chest crystal with a sharp crack. The crystal fractured, and the sentinel froze, the golden light in its shell fading to a dull, lifeless bronze before it collapsed, its transmutation field gone. At the same time, Juvia, understanding the principle, acted. Water jigsaw. Instead of a single, solid attack, she created a swirling vortex of dozens of small, razor-sharp discs of water, launching them in a wide, sweeping arc. Most were transmuted, but the sheer volume of the attack meant a few slipped past the sentinel's guard and struck its core, shattering it. The second sentinel fell. Urza, seeing her two teammates succeed with finesse over force, adapted instantly. She re-equipped to her Morning Star armor, which was equipped with a magic blasting cannon. She didn't fire a broad, powerful blast. She charged a small, needle-thin beam of pure magical energy and fired it with a sniper's precision, piercing the final sentinel's core. It, too, collapsed. The battle was over in seconds once they understood the strategy. Naruto had not thrown a single punch. He had simply observed, analyzed, and directed his team, turning their panic into a flawless, coordinated victory. He looked at the three of them, a flicker of approval in his eyes. You learn quickly. The praise, coming from him, was worth more than any medal. They pressed on, using their newfound strategy to dismantle several more sentinel patrols. They discovered the fate of the researchers in the main laboratory. They were golden statues, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and surprise, some reaching for control panels, others trying to flee. They had been victims of their own creation. Lucy, using her considerable intellect, managed to access a still-functioning data terminal. I've got it, she announced, her fingers flying across a runic keyboard. The whole facility is powered by a central core, the alchemic heart. The sentinels are just its immune system. The researchers were attempting to achieve a perfect, stable transmutation, the philosopher's stone, but they lost control. The heart is now running wild, trying to convert the entire mountain into a perfect, orderly, golden state. She looked up, her face pale. It's growing. If we don't shut it down, it will eventually breach the facility and start converting the entire continent. They fought their way to the heart of the vault, a vast, spherical chamber. In the center, suspended by crackling beams of yellow energy, was the alchemic heart. It was a perfect, crystalline sphere the size of a carriage, pulsing with a malevolent, golden light. Guarding it was a warden, a sentinel 20 feet tall, with multiple arms and a much larger, more powerful transmutation field. This was the final test. Urza, you are the distraction, Naruto commanded, his voice ringing with authority in the vast chamber. Keep its attention focused upwards. Juvia, the power conduits feed it from the floor. Use your water to sever them. Create a power fluctuation. Lucy, the terminal you found mentioned a deactivation sequence. There must be a receiver on the heart itself. Find it. They sprang into action. A perfectly oiled machine. Urza, in her Heaven's Wheel armor, flew to the top of the chamber, unleashing a relentless barrage of swords that forced the warden to raise its arms to defend its head. Juvia spread a layer of water across the floor, then used her own body as a conduit to send a massive surge of electrical magic, a trick she developed after seeing Laxus fight, into the conduits, causing them to spark and sputter. The heart flickered, and for a split second, its energy shield wavered. "Now, Lucy," Naruto shouted. Lucy, having located the receiver, a small, intricate pattern of runes near the heart's base, began to chant the complex deactivation code she had memorized from the terminal. As she spoke the final word, the runes flashed once. The warden, sensing its master was in danger, ignored Urza and lunged for Lucy. But Naruto was already moving. He appeared before Lucy, a living shield. He didn't meet the warden's massive golden fist with one of his own. Instead, he channeled the pure, conceptual power of the Celestial King into his palm, creating a small, localized field of absolute order. When the warden's fist entered the field, its own unstable, chaotic transmutation magic was instantly, violently negated by a superior, fundamental law of reality. The golden arm didn't turn back to normal, it imploded, collapsing into a shower of inert, glittering dust. The warden staggered back, its primary weapon gone, its internal systems in chaos. "It is over," Naruto said. He raised a hand, and a single, focused beam of pure, white starlight shot out, striking the now vulnerable alchemic heart. There was no explosion. The heart simply went dark, the golden light within it extinguished. A deep, resonant hum echoed through the chamber, and then, silence. Every conduit, every sentinel, every trace of the Midas curse, was gone. They stood in the silent, dark chamber, the only light coming from Juvia's water orb. They had faced a threat that could have consumed the world. And they had won, not with overwhelming power, but with intelligence, cooperation, and trust. Naruto looked at his team. At Urza, breathing heavily but standing tall. At Lucy, exhausted but triumphant. At Juvia, her face glowing with pride. He had come to this world alone. But he was not alone anymore. "A job well done," he said. And in those 4 simple words, they felt the full weight of his respect. A reward far greater than the 2 million jewel that awaited them. They had been tested, not just by the council, but by the darkness itself, and they had emerged not as gold, but as a team. Forged in the crucible, stronger than any metal. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The echo of a blade and the scars of the past. The team returned to Magnolia not just as victors, but as a single, cohesive entity. The 2 million jewel reward, delivered in a heavy, magically sealed chest by a grudgingly respectful rune knight, was almost an afterthought. When Lucy, with tears of joy in her eyes, calculated that her share could pay her rent for the next 7 years, the guild erupted in a cheer that was less about the money and more about the sheer, audacious success of their newest team. They had walked into a silent tomb designed by the Magic Council's best and had emerged not only unscathed, but having dismantled a continental-level threat with what could only be described as surgical elegance. Naruto's report to Makarov was a masterpiece of understatement. Delivered in his usual calm, factual tone, it detailed the paradox lock, the transmutation sentinels, and the unstable alchemic heart. He omitted any mention of his own philosophical solution to the door or his negation of the warden's final attack, instead focusing on the flawless tactical execution of his teammates. He praised Urza's adaptability, Lucy's quick thinking, and Juvia's precise control. It was the report of a true commander, one who gives credit to his soldiers, and Makarov, listening with his eyes closed, felt a pride so fierce it was almost painful. He had not just gained a powerhouse, he had gained a leader. In the days that followed, the victory settled, and the internal dynamics of the team began to deepen. Shifting from the adrenaline of shared combat to the quieter currents of mutual respect. Urza, driven by a restless warrior's spirit, found herself in the guild's vast, magically reinforced training yard. She was pushing herself past her limits, sweat beading on her brow as she shattered golem after golem with her powerful requips. But a frustration gnawed at her. In the Midas vault, her overwhelming force had been rendered useless, her strongest swords turned to inert gold. It was a chink in her armor, a weakness she was determined to purge through relentless training. "Your power is a river in flood," a calm voice observed from the edge of the yard. Naruto stood there, not in judgment, but with the quiet air of a fellow practitioner. It sweeps away all obstacles. But you were faced with a dam that grew stronger with the force of the current. Urza lowered her blade, breathing heavily. So I need to be stronger. Strong enough to break the dam in a single blow. No, Naruto countered, stepping onto the training floor. You need to learn to be the water that seeps into the cracks. The dam's strength is its weakness. A perfect defense requires a perfect, rigid structure. And perfect rigidity shatters when the right pressure is applied to a single, critical point. He beckoned to her. Come. Do not requip. Use only a single, unenchanted training sword. Try to land a single blow on me. What followed was not a spar, it was a lesson. Urza, a master swordswoman, moved with a speed and grace that was a blur to most mages. Yet, she could not touch him. Naruto didn't dodge or block in the conventional sense. With the slightest shift of his weight, the most minute turn of his body, her perfectly executed lunges would slide harmlessly past him. He wasn't matching her force. He was redirecting it, making her own momentum her enemy. After several frustrating minutes, she stopped, panting, a look of disbelief on her face. How? You telegraph your intent, he explained. His voice patient. I can feel the shift in your magical energy, the tightening of your muscles, the focus of your will, a fraction of a second before you move. You attack the target, I attack the intention. He tapped his own temple. The battle is won here, before the first blow is ever struck. This is what my father, the dragon, taught me. Do not fight the monster. Understand the system that allows the monster to exist, and dismantle it. He then demonstrated, moving with a slow, deliberate grace, showing her how a subtle shift in footwork could unbalance an opponent's charge. How a gentle touch to an elbow could completely neutralize a powerful sword swing. Urza watched, mesmerized. This was a philosophy of combat that transcended mere skill. It was a profound, almost spiritual understanding of the nature of conflict. Her respect for his power, which had been born of awe, was now transforming, deepening into a profound admiration for the mind that wielded it. He was not just strong. He was wise. Juvia, meanwhile, sought her own form of growth by the banks of the river that flowed through Magnolia. She was trying to break free from the shackles of her own magic. To create shapes and forms with her water that were not born of her innate melancholy. But her creations, though powerful, always seemed to droop, to carry the weight of unshed tears. Naruto found her there, watching the gentle flow of the river. He sat beside her on the grassy bank, a comfortable silence stretching between them. He did not offer advice or encouragement. Instead, he pointed to the night sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear in the twilight. The King of Stars taught me that the universe is mostly empty, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to harmonize with the river's murmur. It is a vast, cold, and lonely darkness. But it is not a flaw. That emptiness is what gives the stars their meaning. Without the darkness, their light would be invisible. He turned his crimson gaze to her, and in his eyes, she saw not pity, but a deep, shared understanding of solitude. Your sadness is not your weakness, Juvia. It is the deep, dark sky of your soul. Do not try to banish it. Let it be the canvas upon which you paint with light. He held out his hand, and a small, perfect sphere of his golden celestial energy hovered above it. Show me your rain. Hesitantly, Juvia summoned her own magic. A small, gray cloud formed above them, and a gentle, sad rain began to fall. But when the raindrops passed through the light of Naruto's miniature star, they were transformed. Each drop became a prism, catching the golden light and refracting it into 1,000 tiny, shimmering rainbows. The air was filled with a shower of liquid light, a spectacle of breathtaking, melancholic beauty. It was her sadness, his light, combined to create something new. Something uniquely, beautifully hers. Tears welled in Juvia's eyes, but for the first time, they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of catharsis, of acceptance. He hadn't tried to change her. He had shown her how to be more herself. Her devotion, already absolute, was now infused with a love so pure and profound it felt as vast and as deep as the ocean she commanded. Lucis' quest for understanding led her to the guild's magnificent, if somewhat disorganized, library. She was surrounded by stacks of ancient texts, trying to cross-reference the alchemical runes from the Midas vault. It was a frustrating, Sisyphean task. The language was archaic, the principles behind it esoteric. The transmutation was imperfect because it lacked a binding agent for the soul matrix, Naruto's voice stated calmly from behind her. Lucy jumped, nearly toppling a stack of books. Naruto was standing there, looking over her shoulder at a complex diagram she had been staring at for an hour. How did you read that? She stammered, pointing at the indecipherable text. It is a derivative of the first tongue. The underlying syntax of all runic magic, he explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He pulled up a chair. Your celestial magic is a purer form of this language. You feel it, even if you do not consciously understand it. The alchemists were trying to write a sentence without understanding grammar. They created a powerful word, gold, but they had no way to control its meaning. For the next hour, he became her tutor. He did not translate the texts for her. Instead, he explained the fundamental concepts behind them. He spoke of magic not as a series of spells, but as a language. A system of laws that could be understood and manipulated. He showed her how the shape of a rune affected its resonance, how the intent of the caster was the verb that gave a spell its action. It was a lecture on the grand, unified theory of magic, delivered with a clarity and depth that made her head spin. Lucy was utterly captivated. She had always been a scholar, a lover of knowledge. But this was on another level entirely. He was showing her the source code of the universe. His immense physical power was one thing, but this intellect, this profound, cosmic understanding, was something else. It was the most attractive, most intoxicating quality she had ever encountered. Her initial fascination with the mysterious, powerful boy was blossoming into a deep, intellectual, and powerfully emotional adoration for the man. But while these new, deeper bonds were being forged within the warm walls of fairy tale, a cold, sharp presence arrived in Magnolia. She moved like a ghost, a cloaked figure whose footsteps made no sound on the cobbled streets. Her magical aura was a thing of terrifying discipline, a razor-thin line of immense power, controlled with an iron will. It smelled of tempered steel, of ozone, and of a decade of carefully nurtured, ice-cold vengeance. Her name was Kagura Mikazuki, the strongest mage of the Mermaid Heel Guild. And she had come for Urza. She did not storm the guild or issue a challenge. She observed. For a full day, she watched from the shadows, her gaze missing nothing. She saw Urza's power, her camaraderie with her guildmates, the way she laughed while eating her strawberry cake. And in that laughter, Kagura heard the echo of a betrayal she could never forgive. Her target was not Urza herself, but a ghost from their shared past, Jello Fernandez. Kagura's family, her entire childhood, had been stolen by Jalal's actions at the Tower of Heaven, and she had heard whispers that Urza Scarlet, a fellow escaped slave, still harbored a weakness for the man. For Kagura, who had dedicated her life to the single, burning purpose of Jalal's destruction, such a weakness was an unforgivable sin. She chose her moment. As the moon rose high over Magnolia, painting the streets in silver and shadow, Urza left the guild hall, a quiet, contemplative expression on her face. Kagura emerged from a darkened alleyway, blocking her path. Titania Urza. Kagura's voice was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Urza froze. She recognized the emblem on Kagura's cloak. Mermaid heel. And she recognized the girl, older now, her face hardened by grief and will. But still the same child she had known briefly in that hellish tower. Kagura, I have no business with fairy tale, Kagura said, her hand resting on the hilt of her sheathed sword, archenemy. My business is with a traitor you protect with your silence. I am looking for Jello Fernandez. Tell me where he is. Urza's heart constricted. Jello, a name that was both a prayer and a curse on her lips. A man she had loved, a man who had committed unforgivable crimes, a man who was now trying to atone in the shadows. To give his location to Kagura would be to sign his death warrant. I cannot, Urza said, her voice firm, though it cost her dearly. What he did was monstrous. But he is trying to walk a different path now. I will not be his executioner. Kagura's eyes, which had been cold, now turned glacial. He does not deserve a different path. He deserves only the grave. If your tongue will not serve justice, Urza, then perhaps your weakness will die with you. With a motion too fast to see, she drew archenemy. The blade, still in its sheath, radiated an oppressive force, a gravity of pure, focused killing intent that made the very air crackle. Urza's body tensed, her own magic flaring as she prepared to requip. The two strongest women from their respective guilds stood frozen in a standoff that could shatter the very street they stood on. But before a single blow could be struck, the oppressive killing intent from both women simply vanished. It did not fade. It was negated, erased by a presence so absolute, so overwhelmingly powerful, that their own form. Audible auras were rendered insignificant. Naruto stepped out of the shadows between them, having moved with a silence that had betrayed neither of their hyper-aware senses. He had been walking back on the river when the twin spikes of focused hatred had flared on the edge of his perception, a discord so sharp it had been impossible to ignore. He did not speak. He did not adopt a fighting stance. He simply stood there, a point of calm singularity in the storm of their conflict. He looked first at Kagura, and his crimson eyes saw beyond the blade and the anger. He saw the ghost of a terrified child, the years of pain. The single-minded obsession that had consumed her entire being. It was a power as formidable as any dragon's roar. Then he looked at Urza, and he saw the agony of her past, impossible conflict between her sense of justice and her personal loyalty. He saw the scars on her soul, far deeper than any she carried on her body. His gaze settled on Kagura's drawn sword. "Put it away," he said. His voice was not a request, nor was it a threat. It was a simple statement of a new reality. The reality that a fight was no longer going to happen here. Kagura found she could not move. Her hand, clutching the hilt of her sword, trembled. Her hatred, the fuel that had driven her for a decade, the very core of her identity, felt like a flickering candle in the face of the sun. This man, he was not a mage. He was a law of nature. To fight him felt as futile as trying to punch the ocean. For the first time since she was a child, she felt something other than rage. She felt a profound, unnerving, and deeply unwelcome sense of awe. The three of them stood in the silent, moonlit street, a frozen tableau of past grief, present conflict, and an impossible, unknown future. The quiet order of Naruto's new life had just been shattered by an echo of his oldest friend's most painful secrets. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Weight of a Name and the Shape of the Void. The moon was a cold, silver coin cast into the deep well of the magnolia night. It offered no warmth, only a stark, clarifying light that bleached the color from the cobbled street, rendering the scene in monochrome shades of truth and shadow. In this silent, silvered arena, three figures stood locked in a conflict that was deeper than steel and older than any spell. The very air was a taut, stretched membrane, vibrating with the twin pressures of Urza's agonized resolve and Kagura's soul-deep, glacial hatred. Their magical auras, lions of scarlet and silver, were poised to tear the night apart. And between them stood Naruto. He was the absolute zero in their equation of rage. The oppressive, soul-crushing killing intent that had radiated from Kagura's sheathed blade, a force capable of making lesser mages faint from sheer terror. Had not been blocked or countered, it had been nullified, erased from existence as it entered his sphere of influence. Urza's own formidable power, flaring in readiness to requip, felt sluggish. Her connection to her armory of swords suddenly distant, as if she were trying to shout through a wall of soundproof glass. He had not erected a barrier. He had simply become a space where their conflict, in its current form, could not exist. His presence was a fundamental negation of their purpose. "Put it away," he had said. The words, calm and devoid of threat, hung in the air, carrying the weight of an unbreakable, cosmic law. Kagura's knuckles were white where she gripped the hilt of archenemy. Her entire life, her every waking moment for a decade, had been a pilgrimage toward this single purpose, the death of Jello Fernandez. Her blade was not a weapon. It was the physical manifestation of her vow, the repository of her grief, the only future she had ever allowed herself to imagine. This man, this stranger with eyes like dying embers, was telling her to set down the entire meaning of her existence as casually as one might set down a parcel. "You do not understand." Kagura's voice was a low, dangerous whisper, each word a carefully shaped shard of ice. "This is a matter of justice. A debt of blood that must be paid. It has nothing to do with you." "You are right," Naruto said. And the agreement was so unexpected it momentarily broke Kagura's focus. "I was not in your tower of heaven. I did not feel the lash or taste the dust. I did not watch your brother die." He took a single, deliberate step, not toward her, but into the center of the space between the two women, positioning himself as the fulcrum of their standoff. But I know the language of pain. And I know the difference between the grammar of justice and the dialect of vengeance. Justice seeks to restore balance. Vengeance only seeks to create a matching void in another. You do not wish to heal the world, Kagura Mikazuki. You wish to wound it as you have been wounded. His words struck a nerve deeper and more painful than any physical blow. He had not just seen her anger, he had dissected it. Laid its motivations bare under the cold, clinical light of the moon. Urza flinched, the truth of his statement resonating with her own guilt. Had she not chosen a path of justice over vengeance herself? Had she not, every day, fought the urge to let the burning rage of her past consume her? My brother, Simon, gave his life to save her. Kagura's voice trembled with a sudden, violent surge of raw emotion. The ice in her tone cracking to reveal the molten grief beneath. She gestured with her chin towards Urza, a gesture of pure contempt. He died for her, believing in a future. She shared with the monster who enslaved them all. Her weakness, her sentiment for that man, is an insult to his sacrifice. She keeps his name from me, protects him with her silence. That is not justice. That is betrayal. The narrative of Kagura's life was a simple, brutalist epic, written in the blood of her only family. To her, the world was a black and white affair. There were the innocent, the monstrous, and those who shielded the monstrous from their rightful end. Urza, in that moment, was the latter. Her mind plunged backward, unbidden, into the suffocating darkness of that memory, a place she revisited in every nightmare. The Tower of Heaven was not just a place, it was a sensory prison. The constant, choking smell of stone dust and sweat. The rhythmic, percussive crack of the guards' whips. A sound that had become the metronome of her childhood. The taste of thin, watery gruel, the only thing that kept their small, starved bodies moving. But worse than all of that was the visual, the vast, impossible scale of the tower, a monument to a mad god, being built by the hands of children who had forgotten the color of the sky. Her brother, Simon, had been her sky. He was older, stronger, his large hands, though calloused and thin, were always a source of warmth and protection. When a guard raised a whip, Simon would find a way to shield her with his own body. When she wept in the dark, he would whisper stories of the outside world, of green fields and a warm sun, a world he barely remembered himself but described with a fierce, defiant hope. He was not just her brother, he was her will to live. And then there was Jelil. Jelil had been a different kind of hope. He had fire in his eyes, a spirit that even the tower could not break. He was the first to speak of rebellion. The first to plant the seeds of a future beyond their chains. Kagura, a small, wary child, had not trusted him. He was too bright, too charismatic. But Simon had believed in him. He saw in Jelil the leader they needed. The spark that could ignite their freedom. The day of the rebellion was a blur of shouting, of chaos, of the intoxicating, terrifying taste of possibility. But it had failed, and the price of that failure was Jelil. They had taken him away, into the deepest, darkest chambers of the tower, for re-education. When he returned, the boy was gone. The light in his eyes had been replaced by a darkness so profound it seemed to drink the very air around him. A strange, red tattoo now adorned his face, and he spoke with the voice of a god, of Zirf, the ancient evil they were being forced to resurrect. The monster wearing Jalal's face had taken over. He spoke of true freedom, a freedom found in service to a dark lord, and he began his own terrible reign. Kagura watched as her friends, children who had dreamed of escape, were twisted into his fanatical lieutenants. But she, and a few others like Urza and Simon, could not be swayed. They saw the lie. They saw the demon. The memory that had become the core of her being, the anchor of her hatred, played out in her mind's eye with agonizing clarity. The final, desperate escape. Urza, a small, fierce warrior even then, fighting with a stolen sword. Simon, shielding them, creating a path. And the monster, Jelil, descending upon them, his power a terrifying wave of dark gravity and celestial fire. Simon had pushed her forward, towards a small boat. Go, Kagura, live and be free for both of us. Those were his last words to her. She had looked back, just for a second, from the relative safety of the water, and had seen it. Jalal's spell. A blast of utter darkness, striking Simon square in the chest. He hadn't even cried out. He had simply looked at Urza with an expression of profound, heartbreaking love, and then he had fallen. In that moment, Kagura's world had ended. And a new one, a world with a single, unifying purpose, was born. She would grow strong. She would find this monster. And she would sheathe her blade, archenemy. In his heart. It was a vow made by a grieving child, and it had been nurtured into the unbendable iron will of the woman she was today. To her, Urza's conflicted feelings were a luxury, a weakness she could not afford to comprehend. Her pain was a pure, simple, and absolute thing. Urza watched the play of raw agony on Kagura's face, and her own heart felt as if it were being crushed in a vice. She remembered that day. She remembered the smell of ozone from Jalal's attack, the sight of Simon falling, the gut-wrenching, soul-tearing scream that had ripped from her own throat. Kagura's pain was her pain. Kagura's loss was her loss. But their memories, born from the same tragic moment, had led them down two entirely different roads. Her mind, too, was dragged back into the pit. But her memories held a different texture. She remembered the moments before the darkness, the moments Kagura had either not seen or had forgotten in her grief. She remembered Jalal, the boy. Not the charismatic leader, but the frightened child who had taken the blame for a stolen ration to save a younger boy from a beating. She remembered the earnest, desperate hope in his eyes when he first whispered the plan for the rebellion, a plan born not of arrogance, but of a fierce, protective love for his friends, for his makeshift family. Her flashback was sharper, focused on the transition. She remembered being in the dungeons, awaiting punishment, when Jalal had been dragged past her cell, his body broken, his spirit seemingly extinguished after his torture. But as he passed, he had looked at her, and in his eyes, she had seen not defeat, but a silent promise, I will not abandon you. Then came the possession. Urza had seen it happen. She had felt the surge of malevolent, ancient magic from the punishment chambers, a wave of pure evil that had washed over the entire tower. When Jalal emerged, she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the boy she knew was gone. His body a mere vessel for the entity that called itself Zirf. The monster's cruelty was not the cruelty of a fallen friend, it was the ancient, impersonal cruelty of a god to whom human lives were less than insects. And in the final moments of their escape, just before Simon's sacrifice, there was another memory, a split-second event that had haunted her for years. As Jalal prepared his final, killing blow, the one that would ultimately take Simon, for a fraction of a second, the dark possession in his eyes had flickered. She had seen the boy again, his face a mask of pure, internal agony. A tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. His mouth had formed a single, silent word, run. It was a ghost of the real Jalal, fighting from the depths of his own spiritual prison. That single, fleeting moment was the seed of her conflict. It was the reason she could not condemn him as Kagura did. She was not protecting a monster. She was holding on to the faint, desperate hope that the boy she knew, the boy who had tried to save them, was still trapped somewhere inside. Her path was not vengeance. It was a desperate, painful, and perhaps foolish, quest for salvation. The two women stood locked in the prison of their own pasts, their shared trauma creating an unbridgeable chasm between them. Your memories define you, Naruto's voice cut through their silent reveries, drawing them both back to the cold, moonlit present. He spoke with a quiet, profound authority, as if he had walked through the corridors of their minds and read the tragic histories written there. But memory is not truth. It is an echo, colored by the shape of the room in which it reverberates. Your room, he said, his gaze on Kagura, is a tomb, sealed by grief. Every echo sounds like a funeral dirge. He turned to Urza. Yours is a cathedral, built on hope. Every echo sounds like a prayer. Both are beautiful, both are strong, and both are incomplete. He raised his hand, not in a threat, but in an offering. The air between the three of them began to shimmer, not with heat, but with a strange, golden, celestial light. It was the calm, orderly power of his other father, the power that wrote the laws of the cosmos. You cannot see the other's truth, because you are blinded by the pain of your own, he said, his voice taking on a resonant, ethereal quality. Then let me be your eyes. He did not cast a spell. He did not invade their minds. He simply created a field, a space where the fundamental laws of perception were gently rewritten. He took the powerful, raw emotional energy radiating from both women, Kagura's focused, piercing hatred and Urza's broad, aching guilt, and wove them together. He did not create an illusion. He created a shared sensory experience. For a moment, the world dissolved. Kagura was no longer on a street in Magnolia. She was standing behind Urza's eyes, looking out at a young Jelil taking a whipping meant for another. She felt, with a shocking, disorienting clarity, the fierce, protective loyalty that Urza had felt for him. Then, the scene shifted. She was looking through Urza's eyes again, seeing the flicker of the real Jelil, the tear, the silent plea to run. Just a moment before he struck down Simon. The monster was still a monster, but for the first time, she saw the prisoner inside. The target of her hatred suddenly had a face, and it was the face of a victim. Simultaneously, Urza was plunged into the chillingly simple, black and white world of Kagura's grief. She stood on the edge of the water, a small, helpless child, and watched her entire world, her brother, her sky, her hope, be extinguished by a single blast of darkness. She felt the vow of vengeance being forged, not as a choice, but as the only possible response to a pain so absolute it blotted out the sun. She felt the decade of lonely, relentless training, the hardening of a soft heart into a blade of Damascus steel. And she understood. She understood that Kagura's path was not one of cruelty, but one of a terrible, unwavering love for the brother she had lost. The celestial light faded as quickly as it had appeared. The three of them were back on the street, the moon still cold, the stones still hard beneath their feet. But the very ground of their conflict had shifted, cracked by the earthquake of shared truth. Kagura was trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The perfect, simple clarity of her hatred was gone, replaced by a confusing, muddy torrent of new information, of new feelings. Her rage had been a pillar of fire, guiding her through the darkness of her life. Now, that pillar had crumbled, leaving her lost, adrift in a void of uncertainty. Her hand, which had been clutching archenemy with the strength of a dying promise, went limp. The sheathed sword felt impossibly heavy, its purpose now clouded, its promise uncertain. With a soft, metallic scrape, she forced it back into the scabbard on her hip. The sound was as loud as a thunderclap in the silent night. A declaration of surrender not to Urza, but to a truth she could no longer deny. Urza's own face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. The shared experience had not erased her guilt, but it had washed away her uncertainty. She understood Kagura's path now, and she understood her own. Her hope for Jalal's redemption was not a betrayal of Simon's memory, it was the only way she knew how to honor it, by fighting to save a soul, rather than taking one. Just as the fragile, heavy silence threatened to become permanent, three figures hurried into the street, drawn by the residual flares of magical energy. Lucy, Juvia, and Wendy stopped short, their eyes widening as they took in the scene. Urza and a strange, powerful woman on the verge of tears, and Naruto standing between them, radiating a calm so profound it was more awe-inspiring than any display of force they had ever seen. Juvia's eyes were fixed on Naruto, her heart swelling with an emotion so powerful. It felt like a physical tide within her. He had not fought, he had healed, he had faced a storm of pure, undiluted hatred and had calmed it not by opposing its power, but by understanding its source. He truly was her son, a light capable of parting the darkest, most sorrowful of clouds. Lucy's analytical mind was racing, trying to comprehend what she had just witnessed. He had used his power to manipulate perception, to facilitate an exchange of emotional truth. It was a display of control and emotional intelligence that was, in its own way, more terrifying and more beautiful than his fire dragon's roar. He was not just a king of power, he was a king of hearts, and her own was beating a frantic, impossible rhythm for him. Kagura finally raised her head, her eyes, cleared of the red mist of vengeance, were now fixed on Naruto. They held no hatred, they held a raw, frighteningly intense cocktail of emotions: shock, confusion, grudging respect, and a deep, unnerving curiosity. This man had, in the space of 10 minutes, dismantled the core philosophy of her entire life. He had broken her, and in doing so, he had shown her that there was a world beyond the narrow, bloody path she had been walking. He had become the single most important and most terrifying variable in her existence. My quest for Jelil Fernandez is not over, Kagura stated, her voice hoarse but steady. She was rebuilding her world, one word at a time, but its nature has changed. She took a step back, her gaze never leaving Naruto. I do not understand you. I have dedicated my life to the mastery of the sword, to the perfection of a single purpose. You have no single purpose. You are everything at once. Fire and stars, vengeance and justice. You are a paradox I cannot cut. She turned, her cloak swirling around her. I will not leave Magnolia, she declared, her voice ringing with a newfound, if uncertain, resolve. My blade seeks a singular truth. I believed that truth was vengeance. You have shown me I was wrong. Perhaps the truth I seek lies in understanding you. She did not wait for a reply. She simply turned and melted back into the shadows from which she came, leaving behind not a resolution, but a profound and unsettling new beginning. She left behind two women, forever changed by their shared glimpse into each other's souls. And she left behind a man who had only wanted a quiet home, who now found himself the son to a growing system of powerful, intense, and utterly captivated women, each of them a world unto herself, each of them now inexorably caught in his gravitational pull. The night was quiet once more, but the silence was now filled with the weight of unspoken emotions and the promise of a future far more complicated than any of them could have ever imagined. Chapter 10 End. The End. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.